Hey, everybody, welcome. So, we're having a very special conversation tonight. You've probably seen him before if you watch this channel regularly. This is my friend Luke from Boston, and he runs a great YouTube channel, which is linked down in the chat, called The 12 Gates, that deals with questions of theology and religion. Very insightful and deep conversations they have. But today, he's here to talk about a very serious case on in South Korea right now to kind of give us updates on that. So we're going to get going as we get into the conversation. I do want to let people know that if you have a question for Luke or for me, you can either send a super chat here on YouTube or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin and you can send it that way. Either way, you can send questions. And we just want to go back and forth here. So I guess, Luke, do you want to start out by introducing yourself and then we'll get into the case?
Yeah, my name's Luke. I'm a current Unification Church member based in the Boston area. Like Caleb said, I run the 12 Gates YouTube channel. My work is focused on theological and religious questions, but considering the nature of the case against the church's co-founder, Dr. Hak Jahan, uh, that has been the focus of much of my work recently.
Yeah, so this is the most recent photo of her, right? This
Correct.
is Dr. Hak Jahan. So I guess start out by just telling us who she is, because she's had a remarkable life. I mean, this woman is well over 80 years old, and she has done amazing, remarkable things. I mean, right now she's in the middle of a serious criminal proceeding and all of that, but that's not her life story by any means. So start out, I guess, give us her life story.
Yeah, prior to the beginning of this case, Hak Jahan did not look as you see her now. She did not look like this. She, for many decades, has been speaking on the world stage about many issues related to world peace. So, a little background about her. She was born in 1943, and she was born in what is now North Korea. And she was essentially a refugee during the Korean War as a 6-year-old, trying to cross the Han River Bridge, trying to flee south, eventually all the way down to Busan because of the nature of the war. If you know any history of the war, the Northern Army pushed the Southern Army all the way down south towards the southern coast until there was a turnaround. And then we got the 38th parallel. In any case, she was engaged to be married to Reverend Sum Young Moon, who founded the Unification Church in 1954. He was also born in what is now North Korea, escaped a North Korean labor camp in Hungnam, and fled south during the war as a refugee as well. What's interesting about their marriage is that Reverend Moon and Hak Jahan were married in 1960. Reverend Moon was 40 years old. Hak Jahan was 17. But
Wow.
it was her belief and her personal relationship with God that God was calling her to this marriage and calling Reverend Moon as well. In her memoir, Mother of Peace, she talks about how she felt that she was called as God's daughter to this marriage, to go into this marriage with Reverend Moon for the sake of building world peace. In Christian terms, the kingdom of heaven on earth. And so that's what she and her husband did for many decades. First, by building up the church infrastructure, sending missionaries around the world. And then in the 90s, particularly focusing on what she calls the true family movement, which is a movement to create world peace through healthy, in unificationist terms, blessed families, God-centered families. And that's her main advocacy. And to that end, she's been very focused on, as her husband was before he died in 2012, North and South Korea reunification. That is her biggest and only political goal that she's aiming for, is North-South reunification. Now,
Yeah, well,
however,
let me interject here a couple things. You know, the stories that you find in her autobiography about fleeing from North Korea. You know, there's a particularly heart-wrenching story about like a bridge that she like had just crossed, or, and it was like it was blown up. Can you tell us that story? I don't want to get
yeah.
So yeah, what happened?
Her family had an uncle in the Southern military, and because of that connection, they were able to, right before they closed the bridge, because the South needed to close the bridge so that the Northern Army couldn't go across the Han River and get more territory, they had to blow up the bridge. And there was, in the eyes of the Southern Army, no choice, because if they didn't blow up the bridge, the North was just going to, come over.
Sure.
So the uncle in a car raced over the bridge as fast as he could. And right as they crossed the bridge, Hak Jahan remembers hearing a big explosion and hearing the screams of innocent refugees dying on the blown up bridge. So for her, that's her experience as a child. As she calls it, the screams of people, and they're being thrown around, as she says, like almost like toys, being thrown around, blown up. That was her early life as a North Korean refugee. There's another story where she was trying to flee with her mother and grandmother to the south, and she and her family got caught by a North Korean soldier.
Wow.
And the reason why they weren't, taken away by the soldier was because she sang to the soldier. And because of her singing, she says that the soldier just said, your little girl's very sweet. Just go back home. Don't keep going. Of course, they
Wow.
did keep going, because that's what many people were doing in those days in the war, fleeing south. And that was her experience as a child. And that really shaped her vision for wanting a peaceful Korea, according to her memoir.
Wow. I mean, Bruce Cummings, who is the top scholar of Korean history in America, he made a documentary film for BBC called The Unknown War, when he talked about the Korean War, because we don't know anything about it in America. And this is a war that had a death count in like 3 to 4 million people died in the Korean Peninsula. Every building above 1 story tall in North Korea was blown up, every single one. And like the airplanes would go back, with the bombs still on them, because they'd say there's nothing left for us to bomb. I mean, it was just a devastating war. And we kind of forget that in America, and we don't ever hear these kinds of stories, because I bet millions of Korean families have stories like this in their family because of that devastating conflict. And we always just forget that. And you then were getting to the fact that she's dedicated to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. But I'm sure you will emphasize, and we should emphasize here to our viewers, she is 100% anti-communist. She is not a communist by any means. I mean, she is a conservative in a lot of ways, but committed to peaceful reunification. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, her and her husband, especially her husband, Reverend Moon, were very staunchly anti-communist. They actually paid a visit to Kim Il-sung in 1991. And the stories from Reverend and Mrs. Moon's, staff were like, oh my God, we're going to die because of what Reverend Moon said to the North Korean leadership. When basically before he met Kim Il-sung, he had a meeting with various members of the government, and he gave a speech basically denouncing Duce ideology. And one of the staffers who was with them recounts, you can find it online, was like, oh no, are we getting out of here? Very anti-communist. But it was really their heart towards Kim Il-sung that allowed them to meet. There's a famous photo of Reverend Moon and Kim Il-sung, hugging, embracing each other. And
Yeah, I
Reverend
think I have that photo here. Keep
Mhm.
talking while I pull it up. Go on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Reverend Moon recounts that they even went hunting together. And keep in mind, it was under Kim Il Sung's government that Reverend Moon was put into Hungnam labor camp. And, when Hak Jahan was fleeing as a refugee. So they are very anti-communist, but their heart is of embracing, their enemy with love, not fighting with violence, not attacking them with words of animosity or hatred. But then here they are. A portrait of both of them with Kim Il-sung.
Yeah.
And this heart towards Kim Il-sung actually has allowed the Unification Church to be one of the few groups in the world that have a good relationship with North Korea. For a while, the Unification Church was manufacturing cars in Pyongyang. And when Kim Il-sung died, the Unification Church was allowed to have sent a representative to attend the funeral. And even there's reports that Kim Jong-un sent Hak Ja-han flowers in 2020 to celebrate the wedding anniversary of Hak Ja-han and Sung Myung-moon. So these are all things that, most people don't know the facts behind. These are not just stories or propaganda by, some, church that people call a cult. No, these are facts of their work. This photo is real. There's way more. The story of the staffers is real. The story of Hak Ja-han as a refugee is real. And, right now we have, a situation where, because the government of South Korea is not only believing these accusations of the Unification Church being a cult or some sort of sect, they are openly telling people, government officials, even President Lee, that the Unification Church and other groups are a threat to public welfare, and we need to strip them of religious status, similar to how Japan did.
Okay, so you've kind of given a background. She married Reverend Sun Myung Moon. They were the leaders of this religious movement that was dedicated to restoring the family. So I guess fast forward to 2025, 2026, why is she on trial right now? And why is she facing at such an old age, such serious criminal charges? What's going on?
Right. And for context, the charges that she's facing, which are primarily bribery of political officials and violation of the Korean Political Funds Act, which essentially says that no religious entity can do any lobbying or activity with regard to politics or elections. In the United States, there's lobbying all the time, there's fundraising all the time, there's connections with politicians. In Korea, that is strictly forbidden, and the current administration is actually taking a very harsh attitude towards that kind of behavior. There are many people that have been detained and arrested for any involvement in elections. For example, Pastor Hyun Sun Bo, who was actually one of Charlie Kirk's spiritual advisors, he was detained because his church was in his church congregation, he was talking about politics and encouraging support of specific candidates. In any case, for Hak Ja-han, the charge is that she ordered one of the top officials of the Unification Church at the time, Yoon Young-ho, to bribe former First Lady Kim. If you know anything about the previous administration, the current administration is going after them because the previous administration, under President Yoon, different Yoon, kind of tried to launch a coup.
Right.
And that was, he's facing life in prison and possibly the death penalty. And the current administration is really going hard after anyone who was supportive or helping that administration in any way. So Hak Ja-han has become a part of this wider, kind of attack on people from the previous administration by the current one. And so she's accused of violating the Political Funds Act, of directing Unification Church officials to provide expensive gifts, such as luxury handbags. Now, are they in the millions of dollars like, we talk about in the United States? No, but, it's a serious charge. Those kind of handbags are seen as like a kind of symbol. There's a sort of symbolic significance when you give a gift of that nature to anyone. So that's the charge. The problem is the only one really saying, according to the court testimonies that have been coming out, that Hak Ja-han gave the order was the guy who admitted to doing the crime, Yoon Young-ho. Everyone else and all the other transcripts basically indicate that Hak Ja-han had and could not have had any knowledge of such an action, and that she did not, in fact, order Yoon Young-ho, this church official, to commit this violation of the Political Funds Act. She's maintained total and complete innocence. She's not taking any pleas, which would be a lot easier for her at her age, to just take a slap on the wrist, maybe help the prosecutors get some other person that was helping the previous administration, which has been alluded to by President Dunkley, actually, of the Unification Church, that of the American branch, that she could have taken a plea, a slap on the wrist. But Hak Ja-han's like, nope, I did nothing wrong. I didn't order anyone. This was his actions. And in her recent statement, she's even expressed how sad she is that someone she trusted, put the church and herself in this position. So that's kind of what the charges are. My opinion is that, as a unificationist too, but also analyzing the facts, that it's a bogus case. There's not a lot of evidence. It just relies on the person who admitted to committing the crime's testimony.
Right. So I guess to put it in like more terms in relation to like how it might go down in America. So this would be like, you have the pastor of a church, one of his employees, without talking to him, goes to a politician and gives a gift that is interpreted as a bribe. And so then they catch him for doing that and they arrest him. And he says, well, actually, the pastor made me do it. And so then they drag the pastor into court, right? But the only evidence that the head of the church made him do it is the word of the guy, right? I mean, there's no written order to do this. There's no transcript. There's no emails. There's no record of anything, right? It's just that this one guy, right, gave this bribe, was arrested for it. And is there any contention about the fact that it was a bribe? I mean, do we even know it was a bribe? I mean, was it a bribe that this?
Well, that's the other question too, because for it to be a bribe, you have to have a quid pro quo.
Right.
And, there's question if there even was a quid pro quo about, this gift. And the other thing too is that I've heard, testify to this. The way Dr. Haq Jahan leads is that she's very delegatory. She doesn't give many specific instructions. She basically sets out a goal and then she lets the various officials, figure out how to do it. And Yoon Young Ho, who was, kind of third in command of the Unification Church, Haq Jahan and then her secretariat, and then he was the director general of the entire international church. So he was third in command. So he had a lot of power and opportunity to have committed this and would not have needed Haq Jahan's authorization to do so at all.
Okay.
There are news articles, and I've talked about these articles in the past on my YouTube channel and on X, where Yoon Young Ho admits that a lot of the things he was doing, especially in 2022 and 2023, especially with regard to Cambodia and trying to, get South Korea to have a better relationship with Cambodia and doing certain development projects in Cambodia, were his personal ventures, which Haq Jahan did not know about. And in fact, is part of the reason why he was dismissed from his position in 2023. Part of the reason why he was dismissed, this article talked about, was because he was going off doing his own things, because he was third in command of the church, but did not get any authorization from Dr. Haq Jahan, which makes sense given the nature of how she leads. She's very delegatory. She just delegates and then gets reports back. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Yoon Young Ho did this of his own accord for whatever reason. People are, even in the Unification Church, are assigning, malintent towards Dr. Yoon Young Ho. I wouldn't even go that far. I bet he was just trying to accomplish what he saw as very important goals, which is to strengthen South Korea and strengthen, the Korean Peninsula, which is an objective Haq Jahan has talked about. And so did her late husband. Strengthen the Korean Peninsula, create a political environment in which South Korea is a leader in Southeast Asia. But maybe he just, thought he was doing the right thing, but, or maybe he was being malicious. Maybe he was like, I'm going to, bribe these politicians. I'm going to get their ear. Who knows? But the fact is that there's a lot of evidence that he did it on his own, that Haq Jahan had no clue, and that all the written and other testimonial evidence show that she did not, nor could have not, given the order to do so.
Very good. I just want to remind people watching that if you do have a question for Luke or myself, you can send a super chat, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. But we've been following this case on this YouTube channel a little bit, over the years. There's been rallies in New York City. We had 2 rallies to support Dr. Haq Jahan and other things that we've covered on this channel. But I guess the reason that we're here talking tonight is because The trial has concluded and they're waiting for the verdict. And it's the sentence that the prosecution is asking for is quite serious. Do you want to touch on that? And I guess we have a video too.
It's serious. Yeah, maybe you want to play the video of
Okay.
the American Unification Church president, Damian Dunkley, who issued a statement on video the day of her final day in court. The trial ended. And this is what he said.
Anybody interested in either faith, freedom, peace, or even humanity, this will interest you, or should I say concern you. As mentioned, Dr. Hak Jahan, the Mother of Peace, spent her final day in court today, final arguments from the prosecution and defense. And the government's prosecutors asked the court to jail her, not for 5 or 6 or 7, 1, but 13 years. Is way beyond anything we could have imagined. And it's shocking. But this is just what they are asking for. This is not the final ruling. Final ruling expected to be August 31. What did she do? How did she respond as she sat there in the courtroom, surrounded by lawyers and judges, with the world watching? She said this: "Throughout my life, I have served God and devoted my entire life to realizing one family of humankind at peace. Even now, wars and conflicts continue around the world with people shedding their blood. In the midst of this, I continue to proclaim, let us attend God, our Heavenly Parent. And I've been appealing for all nations to do so together as one. I know that the Mother of Peace, I've sat with her on so many times and heard her say, all I'm dreaming of is a world where all people, all families can experience joy with God, holding hands with one another as families." That's what she's fought her entire life for. That's what she will continue fighting her entire life for. And it's what she's hoping we will do alongside her. So no matter the outcome on August 31, for anyone that cares about freedom, faith, or peace, or even humanity in this case, don't be dismayed, don't be weary. She's not just an 83-year-old great-grandmother sitting in a wheelchair in custody. She's a leader, and she's leading by example, reminding us that in the face of any tsunami, any challenge, continue standing up for what you believe and work alongside those who are willing to stand with you. Bless you. Thank you. Bye.
So I guess I will ask you, because you look at her there in the wheelchair, right? Why is there such rage and hatred for this elderly woman? Because I guess I do know that if you talk to anyone from South Korea, they know about Reverend Sun Young Moon. They know about her, and there tends to be really big emotions that come up. And it seems like the only way the prosecution would even be comfortable asking for this huge sentence is because there's kind of an emotional reaction related to her and her family and her religion in South Korea. And I don't understand that. And I feel like if you can explain that, maybe that could help put the case in context. Because you look at that picture, why would anyone want to put that woman in jail for 13 years? You just look at this is a grandmother, just leave her alone, but that's not the feeling that a lot of people in South Korea have. There is kind of this vendetta a lot of people have against her and her late husband. So can you explain that?
Yeah, well, frankly speaking, it's because many people in South Korea and around the world consider the church that she helped create to be a cult or some weird sect. And for the past several years in South Korea, I would say for about the past 7 years, in particular, ever since COVID-19, and I'll tell you why in a second, there's been a lot of animosity towards groups like the Unification Church, because it's not just Dr. Hak Jahan. We've talked about Pastor Hyunbo Son. There's
Mhm.
also Lee Man-hee, the founder of Shincheonji Church, who, you know, both groups are not the norm. They have, different beliefs than
Okay.
other religions. They have, messianic type figures leading their religions.
Well, let's just stop there for a minute because, part of being a mature adult, right, is that, I'm not a Mormon. I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Mormon. I don't consider Joseph Smith to be a prophet, but I understand that Mormons have different beliefs than I have, right? And that, I'm not a Muslim. I don't, recognize the Quran or the Prophet Muhammad, but I don't consider it a crime to be a Muslim, and that religious diversity is just part of our modern world, right? And that we live in a world where religious freedom is considered to be one of the most important values that they're always talking about at the United Nations. So even if someone were to say, okay, this group has weird, strange beliefs that are different than regular Christianity or different than my beliefs, how is that an argument for the church having, being disbanded in Japan, for her to be thrown in jail? Why? I don't see that in and of itself as a reason to want to torture an elderly woman. So
Yeah.
right there, I'm asking questions. So go on.
Well, and here's the thing. When you immediately, connotate a group as a cult or a
Okay.
sect, you more intensely than, a normal traditional church, you more intensely focus on their flaws. The Unification Church, like other churches throughout the world, has had problems. It's had, manipulated fundraising practices, for example. That's one of the big reasons why people were so upset in Japan, because the person who assassinated Shinzo Abe, and I think we can say assassinated without the alleged because I think he's been convicted, but we'll say alleged just in case. He says that he killed Shinzo Abe because he was tied to the Unification Church and that the church forced his mother to give away all her money. That was his position. Whether that's true or not, there's even debate about, how much she gave or, how much is he really even a member or a former member, etc. In any case, and that's been proven to happen. There are civil court cases where the Unification Church has offered to pay money to the victims of families because in the church's history, especially prior to 2009, that practice was happening. And, I've said on my channel repeatedly that I totally denounce that practice if it's happening still.
Well, I
But
mean, didn't
to,
Jesus tell his followers to give all you own to the poor? I think there was a story of a rich man went to
yeah,
Jesus and said, "How can I be perfect?" And he said, "Take all that you own and give it to the poor." And I mean, if this allegedly did happen, it's not the first religious group that has made demands that are unreasonable like that.
right.
So
Think of the Catholic Church. Think of the Catholic. I have to point back to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, for all its good, has had so many deeply disturbing scandals throughout its history.
mhm,
Two I will give: indulgences and the priest abuse scandals,
sure,
where millions of abuse cases throughout the world have allegedly been reported. Millions. But we acknowledge, or at least I would say any reasonable adult, like you said,
yeah,
is that churches are made up of flawed people who
yeah,
make mistakes because that's human nature. Humans, when they gain positions of power, often make or are liable to make more mistakes. And that has happened in the Unification Church. That certainly happened in Shincheonji. My friend Chris from Exposing the Cults, we had many conversations talking about Shincheonji. There's also
mhm,
another church which so far has escaped the government's ire, World Mission Society Church of God.
no,
There's many
never heard of
groups that
it.
have made mistakes, including the Unification Church. But because they're weird, they have weird teachings, and they do mass weddings, and their founders, too charismatic, and has a messianic, talks about himself in messianic terms, and all these things, that we need to focus on this group. And they were friendly to the previous administration who launched a coup. How dare they? Which,
Mm,
by the way, evidence shows that many Unification Church members in Korea were part of the Liberal Party in
mm,
South Korea, much more than they found were part of the Conservative Party, by the
wow,
way, which also debunks this whole idea of the other charge, which is that that Hak Jahan actually is later going to face a trial for, which is that there's a charge that under her direction, the Unification Church was encouraging its followers to sign up for the People's Power Party, which articles have come out saying it's totally false. If anything, church members are on both sides of the political spectrum, perhaps even more on the liberal side, probably because they're more friendly to the reunification of North South Korea, from what I understand. So it starts from their cult, and then look at their mistakes, and then, oh, they did bad things. Let's not just hold the people who did it accountable. Let's totally shut down the church, and let's find a way to put their founder in detention unnecessarily. Oh, she's a flight risk. She can't fly because you screwed up her health because you didn't let her properly recover from her heart surgery, which is what happened. The reason why you see her in the wheelchair with the mask and, in her condition is because right before she was put in detention and arrested and formally charged, she had just recovered from heart surgery. And because she wanted to honor the law, she got herself to the courthouse, even though she needed at least months of rest, and she only got a week. And then she needed eye surgery, and they gave her just 9 days of rest for that when she needed much more time. Her health has just been deteriorating because of what's been going on, because the prosecutors are being totally unreasonable. This is a first-time offender too, by the way. She's unlike Reverend Moon, who's, been put in prison all over the place the 6 times. Dr. Jahan's had a clean criminal record. She's not done anything. But because of all these factors, like I've talked about, starting from the premise that, oh, they're weird, they're a cult, and they made mistakes, it comes to let's put her in prison literally for the rest of her life. She's 83. 13 years, she'll be 96. I mean...
Yeah, there's some nuances here I want to get into. First of all, yes. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 23.
Okay, I'm 38. We're both, I'm a millennial, you're a Zoomer, but, there are people in our audience who are, boomers or Gen Xers. And when they hear about the Unification Church, their minds immediately go back to decades ago, people standing on the street selling flowers and all kinds of strange media stories about people being kidnapped and unhypnotized and all kinds of media sensationalism. And that's all before you and I were born, decades before we were born, this kind of thing was going on. But that's kind of what people know about it. And the other thing is, I think it's important to clarify, there was a church that was in the news a lot 4 or 5 years ago. Because they kind of worship AR-15 rifles. And I guess they did after a school shooting where the nation was mourning this horrendous school shooting, there was a church in Pennsylvania that did a really offensive ceremony honoring AR-15s. I'm all for the Second Amendment. I don't believe in gun control, but it wasn't a wise thing for them to do that. But that's not affiliated. Those are people that left this church. They have nothing to do with it. They
officially left. They're a separate entity. The current church has many times publicly denounced their activities and the activities of the founder of that church, one of Reverend Moon's sons.
Yeah. So there's this other church that does some weird stuff with guns. They're not even supporting her at this point, even though there's some family connection. They have completely cut ties, right? I mean,
that's right. I've even seen some of their broadcasts. They are not supporting her at all whatsoever.
Right. So if you're mad about guns, don't relate that to this case. But also, I mean, your parents are unificationists, right? You grew up as a unificationist?
That's right. Yes.
So do you want to talk some about, like, I guess the American reputation that the church has, and this, this whole thing about, I remember my mother told me, well, anyway, I could, my mother grew up in a time when the church was more visible and told me about people selling flowers and stuff. But, there were, it was kind of a household thing in the 70s and stuff. And you grew up in this. So I guess, do you want to reflect on, like, what is true, what is not true, what's going on in America in regards to this church?
Yeah, so it got its reputation when, Reverend Moon came in 1971 to America. And he brought a bunch of, members from other countries and, basically was building up the church in America through, like you said, fundraising, all sorts of stuff, prints, flowers, the most random things even. church members were selling all sorts of, strange things. um,
There's
to
no
build
eBay
up.
back then, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, you got to
yeah,
sell it on the street, right?
exactly. And, it was for two reasons. Externally, it was to build up the infrastructure of the church. Now, of course, the reputation then was like, well, they were brainwashed to do this. They're just
Mm.
fundraising for the founder. It's like, no, actually, no one forced them to join the church. No one forced them to join, what was called the mobile fundraising teams. We have a group of people live in a van, fundraise, come back to the center after a bit. No one forced these people to do this. They did it because they were doing it for something they believed in, which is the people who were joining the church really felt that they were going to create the kingdom of heaven on earth. They literally, there's so many testimonies of people who were members back then. They really believed that, and they stood by their conviction. And, it was treated too as an internal training, go beyond your comfort zone. Love those who reject you. You get a lot of rejections when fundraising. Love those who reject you. Mobilize, the spirit world, because the church has beliefs about the spirit world, and they believe that if you have a God-centered heart, you can bring down good spirits to help you. Back to that kind of East Asian philosophy, and respect for ancestors. But that's about fundraising. And the other thing that they were known for is their mass weddings and rallies. They would have big rallies, a rally at Yankee Stadium, rally at Washington Monument, hundreds of thousands of people. And of course, the infamous mass weddings when Reverend Moon would picture match couples. And, and then, the members would all assemble like Madison Square Garden, the same place that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce had their wedding. But, all of that was very weird. And a lot of people were like, why are people doing this? And why are they following this charismatic South, Korean guy, or North Korean, but, well, there was no South and North back then. But why are they following this Korean guy who's like talking about himself in, messianic terms? Like, this sounds like a cult. They must be brainwashed. It's like, well, no. They willingly joined after hearing the teaching. There's a lot of people. This is what they don't talk about, the press and the media. They focus on the people that ended up joining. They don't focus on all the people that heard a few lectures and were like, I am out of here. Or they eventually, heard more about Reverend Moon and were like, I am walking away. You will never see me again. A lot of people left. There's no brainwashing. Some people decided to stay because they felt that the Unification Church was fighting for something that they believed in and a goal that they, believed in. There was no, I did a whole college paper on this actually about, is the Unification Church a cult? And, how do you define a cult? How do you define brainwashing? And, even the academic terms, like for example, love bombing, like that's you're going to call love bombing, which is like the idea, scholars say like you go into an environment and everyone's loving you until you eventually say, I'm going to join. And then you get on, the mobile fundraising team. That's kind of the argument. It's like love, love, love. And then you fundraise and it's like, they lied to you. It's like, no. You love, people who are joining your organization. That's normal. You have a choice throughout the entire process to stay or leave. Even on the mobile fundraising teams. Granted, there was pressure to stay, but no one was forcing you. If you just suddenly walked out of the van one day, like they're not going to mind control you back. I mean, it's a lot of sensationalism. And, as an East Asian guy coming to America, he's talking about himself in messianic terms. He's stirring up a lot of trouble. He's very anti-communist, like super, super, super like anti-communist. And yet he's saying like unify North South Korea, like I want to meet with Mikhail Gorbachev, which he eventually did. So a lot of what the media says about the Unification Church is over-essential, is it's not really what it is.
Yeah. Did your parents get married in a mass wedding?
They did, yeah. In the late 90s, they did. They were picture matched by Reverend Moon. They're very happy. I'm not just saying that because I'm their kid. I mean, the Unification families are like everyone else, Some families are really happy. Some families, maybe not so much. But
and are your parents both from the same country? Are they both from the United States? Or
well, my dad was originally from France. He moved here when he was very young. My mom from America. So
okay, I know Because from what I've read, at least, a lot of the marriages are
International,
different
yeah.
nationalities, right? And then that
Right.
was something important, right? It was about creating peace through intermarriage of families, right? Or
That's right. Yeah. Many, German Americans, many Japanese Koreans, I'm, married to an African, as
Mm,
an American, Reverend Moon was very, intent on creating world peace through families. And part of that for him was, well, let's intermix everyone,
okay.
so that, yeah.
All right. So I've got more questions to ask you. Someone sent a question. So we've already got one
Yes.
question that has come in.
Excellent.
I do want to remind people that are watching, you can send questions for Luke and I either via super chat or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. We got one question, and it's actually like a multi-part question that's already come in anonymously. So
Okay.
we're gonna go with that in a little bit. But here's just a reminder of where people can send questions. So I guess my next question to you is, in terms of what's happening in South Korea right now, and what's happening in Japan right now, and what's happening in America right now, how is this affecting the church and its positions? Like, for example, like the way you talked about how there have been like harmful fundraising practices in the past. Would you say that there's kind of like a truth and reconciliation moment going on where the church is kind of coming to terms with some of the mistakes that were made? Is that a fair way to assess things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would argue that's been happening for probably like 15, 20 years.
Okay.
Um, in the 1990s, there was a very significant, almost theological shift, which really focused on members creating families.
Mm,
Um, so Reverend Moon was actually telling members, you know, the whole like fundraising in the van and building up the church infrastructure is over. We've built the infrastructure.
mm,
We've built the church. You are the pioneers. I mean, these are the pioneers of the church, these members. People forget. It's like, oh, you were brainwashed. It's like, well, they were building something from nothing. I mean, Reverend Moon's first church was like a, you know, little boxed, area made out of military ration boxes. I mean,
mm.
he was a refugee. He started with nothing. Um, and but then eventually was like, it's over. We've built it up. Focus on families, grow the church through connecting with other families. Of course, that was difficult to accept for
Mhm.
many people because it's different than what they were used to. So
Yeah.
over the past 30 years, and especially the last 15, I would argue there's been, kind of a coming to truth moment about various things. We don't need to, spend 3 years of our lives or 7 years of our life on a mobile fundraising team as spiritual training. No, like the spiritual training, now that we build up the church, like you can do it at home, you can do it in your family. But in Japan, to answer your question, in Japan, it's the worst for unificationists.
Mhm.
There are so many stories and posts on X of Japanese members talking about how, like, their church is being, every possession, every little thing, Sunday school toys, crayons, lunch in the fridge is being taken out, and members can't even grab it. Books are being taken. All assets in Japanese unification churches are being completely 100% liquidated. That's the order. It's not just, some people have said like, oh, well, they're just stripping their religious status. They can still operate. No one's saying you can't be a unificationist. It's like, well, yeah, but you're taking everything the members have in the church,
Yeah.
everything from the
Things
smallest
that
item.
things that people have built and
Yes,
donated are being seized forcibly.
they're
Um,
seized and liquidated. The church in Japan is not getting this back. All the work that the Japanese members who were not brainwashed but chose to build up, especially the elder generation, those in the 60s and 70s, is being completely robbed by the Japanese government. And I think it's very sad and it's very shameful. And it's really affecting young people in the movement too. The stories come, I'm a member, so I hear these stories that are not, official articles or anything. But, I mean, the liquidation, you can find it on X. There's many members talking about it. But many young people are like, how do I, exist as unificationist here? My church is being publicly, everyone knows it's being liquidated. Everyone knows its religious status has been stripped. Everyone has heard the lies that the media is saying about my church. How can I exercise my faith freely?
yeah.
It's not technically the government taking away your religious freedom, because you technically can be a unificationist, but in practice it's being completely taken away. And South Korea, it's becoming the same with the publicity around Hak Jahan's trial and it being tied up in all the politics there. Everyone knows what's going on because it's being tied up with the Lee administration's attack on the previous administration. Everyone knows it's not easy to be a unificationist in Korea. It's not easy. I mean, yeah, police
Well,
have
I wanted
raided
to-
the church's sacred sites.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on in relation to what you were saying before about how there is like an understanding that mistakes were made and all of that. One of the biggest problems with social media is that no one can ever apologize, right? Kanye West made some posts that were not good about Jewish folks. And immediately he was swarmed. And at first he tried to apologize, but everyone just came at him. And so then he doubled down. And there's similar things like that. And that, we don't have an atmosphere where people can make a mistake, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing and say, look, we were wrong. It's almost like if someone says they're wrong, they're like, aha, even you admit it. And then they go at them even harder. Right. And that's not a healthy atmosphere. And that's certainly not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus's message was that it's better when someone who's done wrong changes and does right. That's better than if they did right the whole time, right? It's that's the story of the prodigal son and all of that. And that's a big problem in our culture. It's like you make a mistake and that you are that mistake, right? And that's just not a fair way to do things. And again, it's selectively done. We don't, the Catholic Church, no one says, oh, that's the child molester church. Well, that went on in their history, but they're more than that. But other groups, we put a label on them because some people fundraised wrong or fundraised differently, and we can't back down from that. And that, I will say also, Netflix, right? Netflix has an odd cult obsession.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's bizarre. I do not understand it. So many films about cults here, cult there, and it's just a little bit strange. And, in America, you could argue that our culture has been very favorable to what you might call a cult. For example, like we have Amish people here in America, right? And any other country in the world, if you wanted to be Amish, they'd say, okay, you can do that. But then if you want to have kids and not have running water and not have electricity, they'd say, no, you can't do that. But here in America, we say, look, religious freedom. If you want to raise your kids to be Amish, go for it, right? There are like Muslim communities in upstate New York where they buy a big plot of territory and they have Sharia law and they just do that. And it's understood that they can do whatever they want, behind closed doors. And that we have this kind of culture of religious freedom because our country was founded on that, right? All the religions that came here were quote unquote cults, right? Pennsylvania were Quakers, right? That was they were considered a cult, right? Rhode Island was Roger Williams. I mean, if you look at America was basically started by religious dissenters, dissident religious people. And so we've been very, very tolerant of that. But now in light of Netflix and the whole wokeification, now it's like everyone is being amped up to like keep their guard up for anything that might be a cult or something like that. And it's a big culture shift that's quite unhealthy, I would think, right? And that we're going a little bit too far in the other direction. I encourage people to ask questions and think freely and not just blindly follow some leader or something. But we've gotten to the other extreme where everyone's very, very paranoid. And it's like, have you noticed that?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, I see it even in, I was talking to you about this, prior to the show a little, but on X, I mean, it's such like groupthink almost. It's like, for example, many people are calling, Candace Owens and, her fans a cult. It's like, okay, I severely disagree with her. She has spread lies about my church. I've talked about it on my channel.
Yeah.
Lies that she just got from a Tumblr account. I know it because I've read the Tumblr account against our church. She got it copy and paste. I do not agree with her. I think she's doing a lot of terrible things. I don't think her fans are in a cult. I just disagree with her ideas.
Right.
And on the other side, with the whole, Israel hysteria, there are many people, who say that those who love Israel are part of a cult. It's like the Israel cult, the Zionist cult. I'm like, all right, why don't we just focus on the ideas? I love when people disagree with unificationist theology because it gives me something to talk about, someone interesting to talk to. But instead, most people don't have a genuine disagreement with unificationist theology. Instead, it's a cult. Their founders are corrupt. They're extorting members. We need to shut them down for public welfare, which is what President Lee himself has said. Unification Church and Shincheonji Church, they need to be shut down because, oh, they're affecting public welfare. They're a cult. It's like, first of all, who gave you, the government, the ability to determine what is a religion and what is not? That's why America is so, uniquely positioned to defend against religious freedom, because the founding fathers had a very clear philosophy. As they were all sorts of different religions, the founding fathers, all sorts.
Right.
Some didn't even fully believe in God, but
Right.
they established from the beginning the government cannot and will not define what a religion is and is not. In practice, Japan has done that. In practice, Korea is doing that, and they are losing religious freedom. That I was skeptical, honestly, about that angle in the beginning. Even as a unificationist, I was like, are we just doing this whole religious freedom craze to just, create a nice message to, get in contact with the people we need to get in contact and make connections just for the sake of it to help our cause? Like, is it really about religious freedom? But I thought about it more, and I'm like, yes, it is. This trial is about religious freedom. If the South Korean government can declare a group and its founder a danger to public welfare, say it's not a religion, and then eventually just, decide to, prosecute and shut it down, that's a problem.
Yeah, well, I don't claim to be an expert, but I have been to a few divine principle lectures where the teachings of the Unification Church are kind of spelled out. And I would say one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that when they talk of Reverend Moon as being a Messiah, they don't literally mean he is Jesus Christ. And I think that's one of the biggest points of confusion, that a lot of people, they hear that Reverend Moon says he's the Messiah, so they think, oh, he's like a crazy man who thinks he's Jesus, right? That's not what the teaching is at all. Do you want to expound upon that and kind of clear up that misconception?
Yes. Back to like not analyzing the teachings, just saying, oh, this is weird, looking at what the media craze is saying. There were actually, by the way, in the early 30s in Korea, there was a big spiritual, wave in Korea with regard to Christianity. And there were some people who literally thought they had Jesus' head on like their head was replaced by Jesus's. They call it Jesus head. So
Wow.
there were, but Reverend Moon was not one of those people. It very clearly says that in unificationism, Reverend Moon is, he's declared himself as second coming. What he means by that is that Jesus is working with him to finish his mission, which in unificationist terms means, creating, expounding upon what Jesus taught to the family level. He talked about salvation and being a perfect person like your Heavenly Father is perfect from an individual perspective. Reverend Moon sees the completion of Jesus's mission as expanding that to the family level, creating the kingdom of heaven through families. It's not he is Jesus himself. It is Jesus working in a relationship with Reverend Moon to complete a mission. And actually, the core text of unificationism, Divine Principle, lays out that actually tons of spirit people do this all the time. They have, at whatever, they were good, they were bad, they were somewhere in the middle. They find someone that, is similar to them, and they try and work with the person on earth to fulfill, a mission that they needed to do. And I'll go one step further. Unificationism clearly says that every person is meant to be a Messiah in their own right. They are meant to be a true parent in their own right. That's a very core unificationist teaching. No one knows that because it's like, oh, Reverend Moon, he says he's the Messiah, and he's leading all these people. He's, they're on mobile fundraising teams. They're just fundraising flowers and prints and, little twiddledacks or whatever on the street. He's just a, brainwasher. It's like, no, you didn't even look at the teachings. Look at the teachings first. Look at what people are building this church for. Japan clearly didn't do that. They did not do that. They fell into the craze of the assassin of Shinzo Abe and how he was a former second gen of the church. And, they highlighted all the problems that they've had in their history and said, oh, shut them down. And we're going to liquidate all your assets so you can't worship anymore.
Yeah. So we do have one question that's come in so far,
Yes.
and we'll do that. And anyone else watching, please send questions. We do need people to ask questions and get
Yeah.
this conversation going.
And by the way, people say, "Oh, Unification Church is a cult. Their members won't talk to us. They're in a cult. They're brainwashed." Obviously not true. I'm not the only unificationist out there, by the way.
Hit him with your
Um,
best shot, folks. He'll
come
answer any
on.
question, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. That there you go. Right here is proof that
Yeah.
that they will talk. So yeah.
And I do have to hop off soon, so I'd
Oh,
love
okay.
to
Okay.
answer this person's question.
All right. And then I do have one question before you
Yes.
go. But anyway, all right. So here's the question that's come in. It's two parts. It says, do unificationists support Palestine? I have heard many South Korean Christians believe in the Judeo-Christian hogwash. This is just what he said. If you include Islam and say Abrahamic religions are fine, that's good. But hey, Judeo-Christian means Christian Zionism most of the times. That's his first question. So
This
there
debate,
you
I
go.
saw this.
Okay.
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson sparked this on X. Unificationism does not. I've read a lot of Reverend Moon's speeches. I've read a lot of them.
Mhm.
I've never heard him address the specific issue of Israel and Palestine. He has talked about the relationship between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. He has talked about that. And he sees it going back to the whole Ishmael Isaac phenomenon. Ishmael, Abraham and Hagar's child, cast out in the desert. Biblical genealogy places them, depending on what circle you believe, as Ishmael's. Muslims actually believe Ishmael's the ancestor of the Arabs and therefore Muslims. Then you have Isaac, the younger brother, favored by God. Kind of this Cain Abel dynamic. Ishmael, the older brother, cast out. The younger brother, loved by God. So Reverend Moon kind of sees, kind of Islam as kind of naturally put in that Cain position compared to Judaism and Christianity. But then when you get to Judaism and Christianity is in kind of that Abel position, favored by God. And so you kind of have this, elder brother, younger brother relationship between these three religions. That's how he sees them. He sees the whole political landscape, the whole, racial landscape, all within Cain and Abel, that very, first story. But he doesn't weigh in specifically Israel, Palestine. He does warn, though. He does warn that, and this is very interesting considering the modern discourse, he warns that a radical Muslim Marxist alliance, especially with China, could be very dangerous. That is one thing he did warn about. He warned that after the Cold War, that if China, is able to, create an alliance with radical Muslims, not moderates, right, not the Sunnis, but particularly Shiite Muslims, although he didn't say it specifically what branch, it could be a problem. In terms of Israel, what he said, what Reverend Moon said about the Jews is this. He and Dr. Haq Johana said two separate things. They don't contradict, but they're separate. Reverend Moon has said, especially in his earliest manuscript, that the Jews are in an economically wealthy position for the sake of creating the kingdom of heaven after World War II. He saw the Jews, the English, and the Americans as, having these economic resources, and that they needed to pool their efforts for the sake of world peace. That's what he said. Dr. Haq Jahan has a more, controversial stance, which she feels that the Jewish diaspora and the, spreading out and, becoming a minority throughout 2,000 years since Jesus' death is indemnity or debt because of crucifying Jesus.
Wow.
Very radical take.
Yeah,
But
that'll make some people angry if you say that. But
so Reverend
yeah.
and Mrs. Moon are going to make both sides angry. They're going to make
Yeah.
all sides angry, but really what it says to me is they want world peace. They always frame things in this is all and everyone needs to pool their efforts for world peace. In regard to the Judeo-Christian thing, that's very interesting. I don't know if I'll give my take. This isn't a unificationist take. This is just my opinion.
Okay.
I've studied the Bible very historically. So from a historical perspective, when people say, oh, the Bible is a Christian text, it is not Jewish. I'm like, well, factually speaking, there's a lot of Jewish texts in there. Now, the Bible as a book is a Christian text, because the Jews didn't make the Bible as we know it. Christians did. So I think it gets a bit semantic and kind of silly, because it's like,
Mhm.
like you, both angles, both sides of it. It's a longer discussion that we probably don't have time for. Very
Yeah.
nuanced, something that X doesn't seem to appreciate. Nuance. You
Yes,
have people
indeed.
saying, Judeo-Christian, you're anti-Semitic. If you say it's not, it's like, well, okay, no, don't just name call. And then the other side is like, you're a Zionist because you believe that the Bible is Judeo-Christian. It's like, what? What happened here? Why don't we analyze the argument, which maybe I'll do on my channel at a separate time.
Yeah. And then part two, he said, today is the 47th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution of 1979. Celebrations were held in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea with officials from Nicaragua and People's Korea. He says, Caleb, tell him about it. Oh, well, I saw that on Twitter. That was going around that, Nicaragua and North Korea have diplomatic relations. And there were, I've been to Nicaragua. I've never been to North Korea. I've met North Koreans at international gatherings. I first met them in Ecuador, and I've met them in Russia at international gatherings. And, but I've never actually been to North Korea. Now there's a travel ban. You can't go. But I know that they have good relations, and today is the anniversary of the 1979 revolution in Nicaragua. And so, yeah, there were ceremonies, that were held. You can probably see pictures of that on Twitter, and that they have good relations. I guess that's all there was to that. And I don't see any other questions that have come in. So I guess since there's no other questions, I'll just hit you with my last question for you, Luke, because I know you said your time is running out and you do have to go. What can people do to help Dr. Haq Jahan in these very serious circumstances?
Well, in America, the biggest thing we can do is make our voices heard. Make our voices heard that there is a threat to religious freedom in South Korea. And the prominent example of this is the trial of Dr. Haq Jahan. That's the biggest thing we can do, because practically speaking, the only real way America can help is if America's politicians, kind of, bring a voice to South Korea administration's ear and be like, hey, we hear this is going on. You got to stop. President Trump very briefly in the Oval Office meeting with the South Korean president last year said, hey, I hear there's something going on with, these pastors, what's going on? And of course he was like, oh, I don't know, I don't deal with that. It's the Justice Department. So more of that. So the more our voices are heard, the more, eventually, politicians will, hopefully, consider it. Unfortunately, the administration is so focused on Iran, and it seems like they're going to focus on Cuba after that, that South Korea seems, if we're lucky, the third on the list. So, but that's all we can do. Keep making our voices heard.
Great. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. Everyone should subscribe to 12 Gates. The channel is linked down below, and tune in for Luke's great discussions that he's having. And we really appreciate you coming on, Luke. If there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free. But you said you have to keep going. I'm actually going to stay on for a little while and show some of the videos of the rallies that have happened in New York City for Dr. Haq Jahan and take any more questions. But
amazing.
Is there anything you'd like to say before you go? Anything you'd like to say?
Just thank you for so much for allowing me to be on here, tell people. I don't agree with everything, but you may say, a CPI might say, but that doesn't matter. I love talking with people I agree with and disagree with, and when we sit down and talk, there's more commonality than not. And hopefully X can realize that, because my goodness, it is getting wild out there. So thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Luke is great, and we really, really appreciate you, Luke. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Great. Well, that was great. I really am glad we were able to have that conversation. It is certainly a case that we have followed very, very closely on this channel for some time. And I actually, since, the night is young, it's 10:08 p.m. Eastern time. I figured that I would put on some of the videos of the rallies that we have participated in New York City to support Dr. Haq Jahan that have gone on, because there have been some pretty big rallies in Times Square. And if anyone else has any questions for me, I guess Luke is gone, but I'm happy to answer any other questions people have about this or any other topic. Hey, Friday night is a great time to hang out. Glad that you all are here. So yeah, I'm gonna put on the video of the of the rally that we did. Yeah, So yeah, there we go. This is the rally we did in the winter time. You know, so it was in the snow in Times Square. We put together a rally to support Dr. Haq Jahan. So I will put that on. Yeah, and we'll talk about anything else going on. You know, because we're here to just talk, and I don't have anywhere that I need to run to. So yeah, why not? Right? It's Saturday night, or it's Friday night. Tomorrow night is Saturday night. So yeah, this is the rally we did in. I guess before I put on the rally, I will say this is. If you have any questions, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. You know, great way to send questions, or you can do super chats. We are monetized, so super chats work. Send any questions that you've got for me to answer. Yeah, so that's a reminder to send questions, and I will put on the video from the rally that we did in Times Square to support Dr. Haq Jahan. So yeah, we'll put that on, and then I'll be back to answer any more questions, talk about anything else people want me to talk about. So here we go.
Please release the mother of peace. Please release the mother of peace. Please release the mother of peace. Please release the mother of peace.
Turned out nice, huh? Like the sign?
Yeah, so we're gonna hold the signs, you know, and we're gonna walk together as before.
But we're gonna brave the snow.
Brave the snow because we are committed to the release of our Holy Mother, huh?
My mother.
Anyone else coming? Parents of heaven and earth, humankind, good afternoon. The Good Spirit World here in New York. Today we are going now to express our heart of support as true children of filial piety, to our true mother, to really speak up, to support. And we know that she is carrying the burden, she's carrying our cross. And we also repent for. We repent for that. But what we can do is, even if we cannot replace her in the detention center, but we can go out and express our support and express our heart to her, to the world. Please release the mother of peace. 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 Please release the mother of peace.
Because there is no reason for her, a woman of 83 years old, to be held in detention. Release her. That will be your liberation. That will be your freedom. That will be known in history that you did the right thing at the right time. Religion is being attacked. Christianity is being attacked. You say, where? How? In America? No. In South Korea.
Almighty God, our beloved Creator, the source of light, mercy, and justice, we come before you with humble hearts, praying for the release of Mother Moon.
We come together to really unite in prayer and resonance, Heavenly Parents. We pray that we can really raise the spiritual atmosphere here in New York so that all your heavenly works can be done and completed, Heavenly Parents. I thank you. May our prayers be received, and may us really come together in unity as one family serving on you, so that we can really resonate and mobilize heaven to really support us at this time, so that your good and heavenly works can be done, Heavenly Parents. I thank you. Mother Hun, I pray for your good health and protection at this time. May you be released so that you can continue your work of peace, Heavenly Parents. Mother, I pray for your safety. I pray for those that attend you now at this time.
What South Korea, the President Lee is doing is really outrageous, egregious, very terrible what he's doing. It's against the law what he's doing. And Mother Moon was never convicted of any crime.
She traveled the world to the most abandoned places to give hope and joy where there was none. She worked to heal the wounds of slavery, one of the biggest human exploitation in history.
And every project that Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon undertook in the world was for the sake of the world, to think that True Mother, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, will seek some favor in one way or another is a mistaken understanding of the role the Moon family have played in the world, in serving the world.
She is concerned with the future of humanity. That is why she created the Sun Her Peace Prize. The hardworking people who are silently working to secure the future of humanity in terms of developing new techniques in different fields, such as agriculture for food security.
The voice of conscience on behalf of our true mother,
Yes.
Hak Ja Han,
Yes.
who at present is under detention
Yes.
for no fault of her own. We repent that we ourselves are insufficient
Yes.
in doing what is necessary
That's right.
so that these kinds of activities do not occur.
That's right.
We know from the very beginning that we lost our original parent.
That's right.
And the struggle between brothers has been a continuous reality in human history.
That's right. That's right.
Killing each other.
All right. Please release the Mother of Peace.
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 I just want to reflect for a moment. My name is Caleb Maupin. I'm with the Center for Political Innovation. I just want to reflect for a moment about the tragedy that Dr. Hak Ja Han is locked away right now, facing these false charges, because this is a time when the world needs her the most. They need her in the Middle East right now, and they need her message of peace and reconciliation. They need her in Eastern Europe right now, and they need her message of peace and reconciliation. They need her in Asia right now and in the Pacific, and they need her message of peace and reconciliation. The world is crying out for the work that she has done to bring people together, to bring nations together, to bring forgiveness and reconciliation. And I think about what she was able to help happen on the Korean Peninsula when President Donald Trump in his first term was able to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Yes.
And I think about if she was not in a prison cell right now facing these charges, how she could be helping us to work towards peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula.
That's right.
And because North Korea and Russia are very close, that process is deeply tied in with peace in Ukraine,
Right.
getting a resolution of the conflict that can end the killing there. All over the world, people are crying out for her message, and that is why she must be released.
She is 83 years of age in a detention center, and these are the words of a psalm, and our heavenly parent is taking care of his daughter.
Where there is confinement, bring freedom for her. Where there is fear, bring peace. Where there is uncertainty, bring assurance from Mother Moon. Where there is heaviness in her heart, make it light.
This is an atrocity, injustice, and we have to somehow do everything we can.
She's persevering. She is bearing her indemnity, and she's persevering for the sake of mankind, for the sake of you and me.
And I think it's a mistake that the South Korean government have placed Mrs. Moon, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, in prison. It have to reconsider her case, especially considering her age. Her public work is far surpasses any other accusation that can go against her.
Ready? Yes. In recognition, Hanul Pumanim! John Pumanim! For the liberation of our Holy Mother Han!
Land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the light with the night from above, from the mountain, through the prairie, through the ocean, while we fall
Yep. Yeah, that was back in wintertime. I think that was in January, I believe. We had a rally in the snow to support the release of Dr. Haq Jahan. So yeah, it was really great to have Luke on there. And Luke, by the way, you should really check out his YouTube channel. He will answer any question, right? If you think that, that his religious group is uptight and that they just won't answer people's questions, that's not the case. He will talk about anything. You saw him just responding to Jordan Peterson there and the whole Judeo-Christian debate and all of that, So anyhow, in terms of today, I was at the United Nations today reporting for RT on the meeting that happened there today. So I guess I'll put the report that I did from the UN on, about the meeting that happened at the United Nations. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin is the best way to send them. I'm here to just chill. This is, I guess we had an interview with Luke that went very well. A lot of good information in the interview. And now this is becoming what they call a chill stream, where I show videos, talk about whatever's on my mind. So get me talking, send me a question, super chat, buy me a coffee. That's how we roll. I guess next we'll put on my reporting from the United Nations. There was an important meeting there today about the war in Ukraine. This was my reporting.
Deputy Envoy said Western states repeatedly ignore illegal actions committed by Kiev while seeking to blame Russia instead.
Kiev and the Western supporters, as you see, continue to blame Russia and very aggressively whitewash Kiev's dire human rights record. They don't want to hear, they want to silence it. And the answer is very simple, because if they admitted that would become an admission of their own guilt. Because these crimes, this blood is upon their heads and their hands.
There was an informal meeting here at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, and the topic was the crimes and terrorist activities of the Ukrainian regime. It was documented how Ukraine targets civilians and how there is a huge amount of glorification of Nazism. Stepan Bandera, a Nazi collaborator, is widely glorified in Ukrainian propaganda against Russia. And they also talked about the forced mobilizations of the population, dragging people off the street. In addition to that, there was one particular moment that stood out. We also heard from a former Ukrainian politician who has gone into exile, who pointed the finger at France, a country that was key in negotiating the Minsk agreement and is now highly complicit in Ukrainian atrocities targeting civilians, and also the Zelensky government terrorizing their own people. This is what we heard from the former Ukrainian politician calling out Paris for complicity.
A resident of the Dnepropetrovsk region has been jailed for criticizing Zelensky over Bandera propaganda. Let me remind you that in 1935, the Poles sentenced Bandera to life imprisonment for terrorism. Now, he is an official hero of Zelensky's Ukraine. I am certain that this speech of mine will be used as evidence of my guilt in the politically motivated criminal case brought against me by the Zelensky regime. This is true fascism. This is open terror. Do you realize this when you support Zelensky? The West talks about its values, but how are they actually put into practice? Russia has stepped in to defend the people of Donbass, even though it was Germany, Poland, and France who should have come to their defense. These are the countries which, in February 2014, guaranteed that the agreement between the legitimate president of Ukraine and the Maidan conspirators would be honored. I would like to take this opportunity to ask the representative of France, do you feel any sense of guilt? Your country had a duty to intervene. You yourselves took on these obligations, yet you allowed a coup d'etat to take place.
The irony was not lost on the audience, the hypocrisy of the fact that all across Europe there is a lot of self-righteous podium pounding opposing fascism, but yet they are fully complicit and arming and backing a regime that glorifies Nazi collaborators in a war against Russia. That certainly was not lost on the audience. They couldn't miss the hypocrisy. Now, the French representative declined to even respond to what was laid out in those words. words and simply chose to rant against Russia and make all kinds of accusations against Russia and totally ignore Ukraine's targeting of Russian civilians, a policy that Ukraine is pretty openly carrying out. Here's the French representative responding to what was said.
France deplores Russia's new attempt to divert the attention of the Security Council by reversing responsibility. As Russia continues its large-scale missile and drone attacks on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, with a devastating toll on civilians and the religious and cultural heritage of Ukraine. France reaffirms its unwavering support for Ukraine.
Now, freedom of religion is something that the United Nations emphasizes in a lot of its proceedings and declarations. And one of the speakers brought forward by Russia was a Christian missionary talking about the oppression and the targeting of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and how the Kiev government is targeting and harassing priests, seizing church property, and doing other acts of persecution against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the name of opposing Russia. Here is some of that testimony.
I could go on at great length listing the injustices committed by the Ukrainian authorities. I could mention the anti-church law that has been passed, which allows the legal registration of Ukrainian Orthodox Church parishes to be revoked. I could mention the countless instances of priests being conscripted. But I would like to make a personal appeal to you, especially to those ambassadors and representatives whose governments are supporting the current Ukrainian regime with weapons and money. Please convey to your governments and presidents that they are supporting not a fledgling democracy, but a brutal regime that kills and maims its own citizens simply because they adhere to the faith of their ancestors. The blood and tears of the clergy and the faithful of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are on the hands of those who defend the Ukrainian regime. God sees all, and justice will be served.
This is not the first time Russia has come here to the United Nations headquarters as a permanent member of the Security Council and documented the real facts about the conflict. They have exposed atrocities by Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian government's glorification of Nazism, their repression of their own citizens, their targeting of Russian civilians. Russia has many, many times come to the United Nations headquarters, UN Security Council meetings, and other venues to document the real facts about what's going on the ground. And as usual, the response of Western leaders and Western media is to simply ignore the realities presented, all the proof, all the testimony, and simply stick to their regular narrative of hating Russia and blaming Russia for the entire conflict. So we did have a very, very important meeting that took place at the United Nations headquarters. A lot of very compelling and important testimony, but it fell on deaf ears as far as Western leaders are concerned. They stuck to their script of blaming Russia. Yeah, that was my reporting today. Now, another question came in, anonymous, and it's 4 parts. So I'll answer it. Then we'll put on more videos. And if people have more questions, feel free to send them in. If you got a question, the best way to send it is go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. You can also do super chats. We are monetized here on the channel. So we can do super chats as well. Just send in questions. So the next, it's a 4-part question sent in anonymously. And it says, the first question, I'm just going to answer it point by point. Why did Zionism become more influential on Jews than Bolshevism? Well, because of the Holocaust. Because the Jews who died in the Holocaust were the Jews in Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia and Romania and Poland. And they were the ones that were more sympathetic to Marxism and socialism, whereas Zionism was very much a British project. Jews in Britain, the Germans never invaded Britain. They bombed Britain pretty harshly, but they never invaded Britain. And it was Jews in Britain who had been more sympathetic to Zionism. And they were the ones that survived, and that the World Zionist Organization was created by Theodore Herzl, who I believe was British. The Rothschilds family were one of the primary backers of the World Zionist Organization, financial backers. They were not members. It's interesting. I guess the World Zionist Organization, to be a member, it was almost kind of like it was like a cadre organization. You were required to kind of give the whole of your life to it. Most people who supported Zionism, like Jacob Schiff and others, were not actually members of the World Zionist Organization, which I think is fascinating. I didn't realize that, but yeah, the World Zionist Organization was financially backed by the Rothschilds, who were British, by Jacob Schiff, who was in New York City. And they financially backed it, and it was the British government that then created the British Mandate of Palestine with the Balfour Declaration. And Britain, created, seized after World War I. You had the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the Ottoman Empire controlled a lot of the Middle East, but they lost. They were on the German side of World War I. So after World War I. You had the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the borders of what is now the modern Middle East were drawn up in this secret treaty between the French and the Americans and the British and the Russians. And the Bolsheviks leaked the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And that's where the borders of Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Oman and Yemen and Qatar and all of that come from. And part of the Balfour Declaration was the British Mandate of Palestine, that basically the territory that, is now disputed, State of Israel and all of that came from, was a British colony called the British Mandate of Palestine. And the British started moving Jewish people to Palestine, which was a British government, British colony, the British Mandate of Palestine. That's what was happening. And after the Russian Revolution, Jacob Schiff, there's a lot of people who claim Jacob Schiff was funding the Russian Revolution. That's not true. Jacob Schiff opposed the Tsar, and he supported overthrowing the Tsar. But then immediately afterwards, he and the World Zionist Organization started trying to get Jews to leave Russia and move to Palestine. And in Palestine, you had the Jewish settlements and you had the local Arab population, and they didn't get along with each other. And in 1936, there was a rebellion because the Jewish settlers were basically colonial occupiers, and they protected oil pipelines. And they were there to enforce the will of the British against the local Arab population. And so in 1936, there were riots among the local population of Arabs against the Jewish settlers, who they viewed as oppressors, as colonial oppressors. So the British sent their military to Palestine to put down the Arab revolt in 1936. Now, another thing that's really common that pro-Israel people will talk about is that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was a very prominent Muslim leader, was very sympathetic to the Nazis. Why? He was fighting the British. The British and Hitler were at odds with each other, and the British were the colonizer of Palestine, and that there were some communist Arabs that didn't, support Hitler. But generally around the world, there was a big divide in the imperialist camp at that point, right? Right now, all the NATO countries, America, Britain, France, Germany, they're all united. It wasn't like that in the lead up to World War II. It was very clear there was what they called the Anti-Comintern Pact. That was the alliance between Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan. It was called the Anti-Comintern Pact. Look it up, right? That's what it was actually called, the Anti-Communist International or Anti-Comintern Pact. And they were on one side, and then there were the Allied countries, and the Soviet Union was increasingly trying to get closer to the Allied countries in the lead up to World War II. Now, 1939, you had the Non-Aggression Pact between Hitler and the Soviet Union. That was temporary. But for most of the late 1930s, from 1935 until 1939, the Soviet Union was trying to build an alliance of anti-fascist countries. So at that point, right, if your main enemy was the British, communism was not very attractive to you, because the communists were saying we need to have an alliance with the British. The Nazis are the main danger. And that's, for example, that's why the Ba'ath Party was formed in Syria. In Syria, there was a Syrian communist named Michel Aflaq. And Michel Aflaq said that his enemy was the French, and that the Communist Party in Syria was saying, well, we need to align with the French against Hitler. And Michel Aflaq said, no, the French are the colonizer. So he formed his own party called the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party, right? So the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was a Muslim leader who was anti-communist, he said, the British are my oppressor. I want to fight the British, and I'm not a communist. So this Hitler guy, he seems like the kind of guy I would want to work with. And of course, the British were the occupier, and the Jews were there working with the British to maintain the occupation. That's what that was about. And you know, the way that it's presented by Zionists is just, well, Muslims and Arabs are all just a bunch of bloodthirsty anti-Semites. Well, no, it was based on the fact that Britain was the colonizer. That Britain was backing up the Jewish settlers, that the Arabs had revolted against. That's what the issue there was. And that after the Second World War, you know, the Holocaust was a very, very horrendous event. And it reinforced the idea that Jews needed to have their own state, that they were not safe in other places. On top of that, the bulk of the Jews of Europe had been killed, but the Jews in Britain, where Zionism was headquartered by Theodor Herzl, were safe, were well intact. And the Soviet Union changed its position on Israel after the Second World War and supported the creation of Israel in 1948, which was a huge mistake, in my opinion, a huge, huge mistake. But they made that mistake, and that's why Israel was created. Now, why was it that the Soviet Union made the mistake of supporting Israel? It was because of the fact that the credibility of the Soviet Union was that they had defeated Hitler. After World War II, communism greatly expanded as a movement. The Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact countries, right, that were liberated by Soviet troops, they aligned with the Soviet Union. North Korea aligned with the Soviet Union. China eventually had the Chinese Revolution and aligned with the Soviet Union. And it was all on the basis of, in North Korea, it was communists that were fighting the Japanese occupiers. In China, communists had done heroic things in fighting the Japanese occupiers. In Eastern Europe, it was Soviet troops that had driven out the Nazi occupiers. And in Yugoslavia and in Albania, it was guerrilla fighters led by communists, Tito in Yugoslavia and Verhoeven in Albania, who had fought against Hitler. And so being against Hitler and being champions of the Jews, defending the Jews that Hitler had killed in the Holocaust, and opposing the Nazis, who a big part of their ideology was anti-Semitism, was a big part of the Soviet Union's credibility. So the Soviet Union, it was under the impression, first of all, that because of the role that the Soviet Union had played in World War II, and because of the fact that anti-Semitism was associated with fascism, there was an understanding, there was a feeling that Israel would be a very, very liberal and progressive country. And until the late 70s, Israel did present itself that way. You know, Israel marketed itself as almost like it was a giant socialist commune in the desert. They emphasized the collective, collective farms, what are they called? The kibbutzim, they called them. And they had a female president, Golda Meir, right? And they tried to present, Israel really framed itself in very, very liberal terms, right? Like it was a kind of a progressive thing, and that the Nazis had been anti-Semitic, and the Soviet Union made a very bad decision, and at the United Nations voted for and backed the creation of Israel. That is true. And almost immediately afterwards, they started finding Zionist spies in the Soviet Union and executing them. And there were hangings in Czechoslovakia of Zionist spies. There was the doctors' plot, right? A number of doctors were conspiring to kill Stalin, and Stalin, they were arrested, and then they called Stalin anti-Semitic because he caught this doctor's plot to kill Stalin. And the press of Israel started accusing the Soviet Union of being anti-Semitic and trying to erase from public memory that the Soviet Union had saved the Jews, right? The Soviet Union had torn down the walls of Auschwitz. The Soviet Union had liberated the Jews from the concentration camps, and trying to erode that. And that was at the same time that in America, you had books like True Believer by Eric Hoffer, which equated Nazism with communism. And at the same time, in the United States, there was a big effort to just kind of rewrite that history and kind of cover up the fact that the Soviet Union had played such an important role. And accusing the Soviet Union of anti-Semitism was part of that. So, you know, all of that was happening, and all of that led to a situation where, you know, Israel was created, and the communist movement supported Israel. And then gradually the Soviet Union started moving in an anti-Israel direction, and Israel started denouncing the Soviet Union. It was really the ultimate break was in 1967. The 1967 war was when the Soviet Union granted diplomatic recognition to the Palestine Liberation Organization. And at that point, the Soviet Union was anti-Israel, but it took a long time. And the Communist Party of the United States, they were very, very pro-Israel, even in 1967. Somewhere in this apartment, I have Gus Hall, the leader of the Communist Party of the United States, book, Imperialism Today, which is his lectures and articles on international issues. And he has a speech from 1967 about the 1967 war. And it begins with, the Communist Party says Israel has the right to exist. The Communist Party supports Israel as a state, but Israel is aligning itself with U.S. imperialism, and that's a big mistake. And, you know, so it's all very, very interesting. And I'm really glad that this anonymous person is asking these questions, because there's a lot, you know, Luke, when he was on, he was complaining about Candace Owens and some of the misinformation that she's put out about his church. You know, Candace Owens and a lot of them love to distort all of this, right? That among conservatives that are anti-Israel now, they're drawing from that old well of Judeo-Bolshevism, right? Communism is a conspiracy by the Jews against the white man, right? They're dipping into that well, and that well is based on a lot of deception and falsehood. There is an overrepresentation of Jews in communism, right? That's true. In the West, at least. I mean, it's not true in Asia, right? The Chinese Communist Party doesn't have a lot of Jews in it, right? You know, the communists of Indonesia, there's not many Jews there. But in Western countries, yes, there is an overrepresentation of Jews among communists. That's for specific historical reasons. And Zionists generally viewed Marxism as their primary competitor and opponent in the Jewish community. So that's important. So the next part of the question that came in, did the Soviets make mistakes of not promoting their Marxist-Leninist pro-Stalin religious figures, such as imams, rabbis, or Orthodox priests? I think one Soviet rabbi was a former Soviet Jewish anti-Zionist committee, was seen as a joke in the West. I have never heard of that, but I don't think that that's the case. For example, in Britain, probably the most well-known pro-Soviet voice that was on television was Hewlett Johnson, who was an Anglican priest. You look up Hewlett Johnson, the Red Dean of Canterbury. He was an Anglican priest, and he was a communist, you know, and he was not an atheist, but he defended Stalin. And whenever on British television they had to have somebody give the Soviet perspective, it was this guy. And he never was a member of the Communist Party, but he had a regular column in the Daily Worker, and he was a priest. So I don't think the Soviet Union made that mistake. I think American communists made that mistake. You know, I think that before World War II, you know, in the early 1930s, the Communist Party was in its sectarian period. They called it the Third Period, from 1928 to 1935. And during those years, the Communist Party was going out of its way to distinguish itself from other leftist trends. They focused on opposing social democrats. And during those years, yes, they were a little bit more militantly atheistic. But during the late 1930s, the Communist Party really, really worked to mobilize and work with religious leaders against fascism. For example, Father Divine, who was an important minister in Harlem, was considered to be a very close friend of the Communist Party and Earl Browder, because the Communist Party was in favor of black liberation and against racism. Father Divine and Earl Browder had many joint rallies and demonstrations. Also, you know, after the Second World War, it seems like there was a big effort to promote religious voices. So I don't know about this rabbi that you're referring to. I really don't know about him. But I do know about Hewlett Johnson. And in the 1960s, it's very interesting. If you read Communist Party literature from the 1950s, right after World War II, the Communist Party, I wouldn't say that they're not emphasizing anti-religion, but they're really emphasizing anti-Catholicism, right? And that's very clear. If you read, William Z. Foster is the communist leader that I have studied his works. And if you read anything that William Z. Foster wrote from the 1950s, it begins with, I'm Irish, but I'm not Catholic, and the Catholic Church is no good, and the Catholic Church collaborated with fascism, and that there's really heated denunciation of the Catholic Church in Communist Party literature in the 1950s. Because the Catholic trade unions were getting the Communist Party banned from trade unions. And the Catholic Church was in a kind of anti-communist frenzy. But then the Second Vatican Council happened, right? Vatican II, they call it. And that was a turning point where the Vatican was seen as kind of breaking relations with America to some degree or other. The Vatican Council had denunciations of the U.S. government for the bombing of Japan during World War II and the bombing of Germany during World War II. And it seemed like that was the very beginning of, in the 1960s and especially in the 70s and 80s, the Catholic Church seemed to be much more critical of the United States and much more willing to work with leftists and communists than Protestants were, right? And that America, in the Reagan years, America was associated with evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists, and others, whereas the Catholic Church was associated with what they called the Catholic left. And you had liberation theology in Latin America. You had priests and nuns that were protesting nuclear weapons and nuclear power in America. And you had, there were a lot of figures. There was in Minnesota, there was a guy named Father Groppe, who was a priest who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., trying to integrate neighborhoods and was like kind of a socialist priest. And then you had Father Roy Bourgeois, who was a Catholic priest who was arrested for stealing draft records and burning draft records during the Vietnam War. And there were a number of Catholic priests that were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And then really in the 70s and 80s, you had, especially with Latin America, you had the Catholic left. And so those relationships are quite complicated. And in fact, on the YouTube channel of UCLA, they posted recordings of speeches that people gave at University of California, Los Angeles over the years. They have a speech by Herbert Apotheker, who was the Communist Party's well-known historian. He's one of the scholars of African-American history, who was a member of the Communist Party, Herbert Apotheker. And his lecture that he gave at UCLA is all about how the Catholic Church and the Communist Party need to become friends and work together. And that's his whole speech is just about how in the 70s, the Communist Party was making really big efforts to try and having a relationship with the Catholic Church. Dennis Kucinich, who was a member of Congress in Cleveland, having been in Cleveland and been in the activist scene in Cleveland when I was like 19, 20 years old, I know for a fact Dennis Kucinich is a product of that. Dennis Kucinich was mayor of Cleveland during the 1970s. And he became friends with, he was mayor of Cleveland, and he refused to privatize electricity, and the economy of Cleveland got really, really bad. He served one term and he was out of office, and they called him the boy mayor because he was only in his 20s when he was the mayor. And then as the former mayor, right after he was out of office, he started getting involved in Catholic anti-nuclear weapons and nuclear power demonstrations. And one of the people that was leading those demonstrations of Catholic priests and nuns and pacifists that were against nuclear power was Rick Nagin. Rick Nagin, and I guess he's no longer in the Communist Party, which I just find to be shocking. But the leader of CPUSA of Cleveland for decades was this guy, Rick Nagin. And he's a Harvard graduate, he's just, he's a Harvard graduate, and he's a guy in Cleveland who's a I think he's retired now, but he was kind of a Democrat activist and a member of the Communist Party USA, a close ally of Gus Hall, right? Rick Nagin. And I'll put an image of him. And he was the leader of the Communist Party. He became friends with Dennis Kucinich because Dennis Kucinich was involved in anti-nuclear protests. This guy, Rick Nagin. And Rick Nagin and Dennis Kucinich became friends, and Dennis Kucinich eventually ran for Congress and got elected. And when Dennis Kucinich was first elected, Catholicism was a very big part of his political identity. And he was anti-abortion. He was anti-gay marriage originally. Now he changed. Now Dennis Kucinich is no longer Roman Catholic. He's a New Age. He's into New Age spirituality. And he's pro-gay marriage. He's pro-choice. It was based on that. So that's the whole thing there. I do not think that the Soviet Union or the Communist Party made this mistake. I think American leftists may have made that mistake and all of that, but there you go. Now, the next question is, this is a long question this person sent, but that's what I'm here to do, answer questions. This is a chill stream. I appreciate people sending questions. The next part of the question is, all right. Hold on. The next part of the question is, what don't people get about Hitler? Oh, I don't know. He was a Zionist and his views on Judaism don't apply to the modern era. Huh? Well, look, what I tell people, is that if you really want to understand Hitler, you need to read Hitler's Banker, a biography of Hitler written by Hjalmar Schacht, a biography of Hjalmar Schacht, who was the main economist of the Third Reich. I read that book, and after reading that book, I understood the roots of Nazism in Germany. Hitler was a product of an economic crisis. He was a product of Germany having been stripped of its colonies as an imperialist country that lost its colonies after World War I. Hitler was a product of a number of unique circumstances in world history that led to the rise of a very authoritarian government in Germany that implemented degrowth measures and built a mass movement, kind of built a totalitarian mass movement, if you want to call it that, and took power, crushed all dissent, and implemented heavy militarization and degrowth measures to stabilize the German economy. And that led to World War II. The rest is history, as they say. And that's what you need to understand about fascism. Fascism is degrowth. It is an attempt to save the capitalist system from the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And that it started out that Germany is a very important territory in Central Europe, and that the greatest fear of the British Empire has always been Germany and Russia together. Because if Germany and Russia combine, at that point, they can drive Britain out of the European mainland. And so after the First World War, when the Soviet Union came into existence, there was a huge uprising in Germany led by Rosa Luxemburg and others that was crushed. A big chunk of Germany declared itself to be the Bavarian Soviet Republic, right? People don't know this. You're not ever taught this in school, right? I took European history in college, and they did not ever mention any of these events, right? But, a big chunk of Germany, Bavaria, broke away from the rest of Germany and called itself the Bavarian Soviet Republic, or Red Bavaria it was known as Red Bavaria, right? Again, that's kind of important. And it lasted a couple of years, and then it was, militarily defeated and rejoined with the rest of Germany. But there was a real fear on the part of the British that a Soviet government or a Russian-aligned government would take power in Germany. And so the British were backing various anti-communist fighting groups in Germany throughout the 1920s. They were what they called the Freikorps, or the Free Officers. These were former German soldiers who killed communists and were anti-communist fighters. And the Nazis were one wing of were one faction, I guess, of the fanatical anti-communist fighters in Germany. That's what they were. And and they were generally a street fighting group, and their leader, the leader of their street fighting group, was a guy named Ernst Rem, who was openly gay. And Ernst Rem was leader of what they called the Stormtroopers, right? And Ernst Rem was this gay man who hated communists because he thought they were unpatriotic. And Ernst Rem, led this street fighting group called the Stormtroopers that went around fighting communists. This is Ernst Rem. Hitler was the front man. He was the propagandist, the agitator for the Nazi Party, and the head of their military division was Ernst Rem. And I'm going to put images of Ernst Rem on the screen. One of the things that's kind of ironic about Ernst Rem was gay, openly gay, because Germany at that point was kind of the center of homosexuality. Sigmund Freud had been from Austria, and Berlin was, the kind of the gay capital of the world at that point. They had drag shows and gay bars and all kinds of stuff. And Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis was very popular at the time. And, society was much less tolerant of homosexuality back then than it is now. But the place that was the most tolerant of it was Germany. And Berlin was like the gay capital of the world. And Ernst Rem was a gay Nazi, and he was a gay guy, and he thought the Communist Party was dirty and working class, and he thought of himself as some kind of ancient Greek, fighter, big macho ancient Greek fighter or something, and that there was a whole bunch of gay guys that fought as Nazis against the communists, right? That doesn't fit what we now know, right? And we know that after the Nazis took power, they killed gay people and stuff, but when the Nazis were just a street fighting movement, a lot of young gay people joined them because first of all, the communists opposed homosexuality and said it was bourgeois decadence. It was a disease or a mental illness caused by capitalism. They did call for legalizing homosexuality. They wanted it to be legal, but they considered it to be a mental illness. And on top of that, the communists really emphasized modernity. Whereas the art scene, you could call it, Hitler had been a painter. The art scene celebrated ancient Greece and Rome and pre-Christian Europe and paganism and the kind of urban middle-class artist types. The Communist Party, especially after Stalin came to power, was really not into the hippies. Hippies were not really respected by the German Communist Party. They were a party of industrial workers. They were a party of soldiers and military people. They took leadership from the Soviet Union. They were a party of very, very poor people fighting for their rights. And the kind of urban artists, kind of hippies, hippie intellectual types, they were more attracted to fascism, right? And Hitler had been a painter, and Ernst Rem was openly gay, and that the Nazis emphasized they were trying to bring back, pre-Christian Europe. They glorified pre-Christian Europe, German paganism, Wagner and Valhalla and knights and swords and castles and all of that. And so Ernst Rem was the leader of their street fighting group. Hitler was their public spokesperson, their agitator. And Hjalmar Schacht approached Hitler, who had built this huge anti-communist fighting group, this little fanatical street fighting group that had a lot of gay people in it, and said to him basically, I think you're a good speaker. Rather than just being a crazy street fighting guy, why don't you consider being the leader of the country? So then there was a fight within the Nazi Party. Where the left, they call them the left wing. I don't know if that's the right word for them, but the more socialist wing of the Nazis called themselves the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And they claimed the heritage of right-wing socialism, which was a big thing back then. Again, American conservatives don't know that there is a such thing as right-wing socialism. But in Germany back then, there was a guy named Ernst Juncker who had written about his concept of Prussian socialism. There was a very well-known conservative German writer named Oswald Spengler who wrote a book called The Decline of the West, where he criticized capitalism because it wasn't authoritarian enough, right? Whereas the Marxist teaching is that history is moving forward, and that capitalism emerged from feudalism, and eventually capitalism will lead to socialism. Socialism will lead to communism. There was a right-wing trend that was very popular among German conservatives called Prussian socialism, that argued that capitalism and socialism represented two sides of the human spirit, and that capitalism was individualism and greed and individual initiative, and socialism was tribalism and loyalty to your tribe and obedience to authority, right? And that Europe was collapsing because it was becoming too individualistic, and people were not loyal to their nation, to their tribe and their race, and they weren't military enough, right? And it was a trend that viewed socialism as the ultimate conservatism and was critiquing European society for being too liberal and individualistic, right? That doesn't exist. You talk to American conservatives, they've never heard of this. It doesn't exist. Conservatives just love the free market. That's not actually true. And right-wing socialism or Prussian socialism was a trend. The Nazis considered themselves to be right-wing socialists. They were really they wanted to rebuild some kind of authoritarian medieval Germany, right? They wanted to rebuild some kind of, German empire, so to speak, where, the German nation was coming together and people weren't individualists. They were loyal to the nation, right? And that was not considered left-wing, because the left-wing wanted to overthrow the oppressor and tear down authority. They wanted, traditional authoritarianism, but that made them critical of the free market. And they were a right-wing trend, and they wanted, they did criticize capitalism. They did support labor unions that went on strike, etc. Well, after Hitler was approached by Schacht, Hitler announced that the socialism in National Socialism just meant that corporations couldn't work against the national interest, and that they dropped calls for nationalization of industries from their platform. The leader of the opposition within the Nazi Party to Adolf Hitler was Gregor Strasser, who was, he was the more socialist wing of the Nazi Party, Gregor Strasser, this guy. And Ernst Röhm, the leader of the street fighting group, was aligned with Gregor Strasser. And that even though Hitler had the majority of the Nazi Party on his side, the majority of the street fighting people, the people who were in the stormtroopers, were supporters of Gregor Strasser. This is all very, very important history. So Hitler basically changed the position of the Nazi Party to be that they no longer believed in quote unquote national socialism. They just believed that national socialism meant being good for the country. This is Gregor Strasser, the leader of the quote unquote socialist wing of the Nazi Party. So after Hitler took power, he had what was called the Night of the Long Knives. And the Night of the Long Knives was when Hitler exterminated Ernst Röhm and Gregor Strasser. And basically, they were all rounded up in the middle of the night and killed. It was called the Night of the Long Knives. And it was when Hitler got rid of the more socialist, in quotes, wing of the Nazi Party. Night of the Long Knives, right? And this is an important thing, because generally the way conservatives talk about Hitler, Hitler was a leftist, he was a communist. Well, no, he was a right-wing socialist, which was a thing. And before he took power, he had a fight in his party, and they denounced the socialism part of right-wing socialism. This is all very, very important, and you can read about the Night of the Long Knives. So after the Night of the Long Knives, Ernst Röhm was executed, was killed. And so because Ernst Röhm was gay, and because Hitler killed him, there is a lot of scholarship that is very sympathetic to him. And it's crazy. This guy was an anti-Semite who killed lots of Jews. This guy was an anti-communist street fighter who killed lots of communists. This guy was a bloodthirsty racist, if there ever was one. I've read his autobiography, and it's unreadable. It's just, various stories of all the people he's killed. And this guy, there's nothing at all that anyone should admire about Ernst Röhm. He was an awful, awful human being, but he happened to be gay, and Hitler killed him. And so there's a huge amount of scholars of German history who tried to write a narrative where he was a good guy. I mean, and you can't make this up. And this shows how crazy academia is, right? They will call you a Nazi if you look sideways wrong, right? You're a fascist, you're a Nazi if you look sideways wrong. But this actual Nazi, who was like the founder of the stormtroopers, well, Hitler killed him, and he was gay. And so there's a lot of people who write books and do all this whole thing about, well, if he had taken power, the Nazis would have been good or something. It's one of the craziest things. Now, another thing is that this guy, Gregor Strasser, he was killed on the Night of the Long Knives, but his brother, Otto Strasser, fled to Britain. And from Britain, the British created a radio broadcast program where Otto Strasser broadcast into Germany with a message saying that Hitler has abandoned Nazism and I'm the true Nazi. Hitler is a sellout. Otto Strasser was the Nazi Trotsky. Right? It's pretty wild, but Otto Strasser was the Nazi Trotsky, right? That just like Trotsky fled the Soviet Union and created his own wing of communism and said, we're the true communists, right? And that Stalin's a big sellout. There's a prototype for that, which is they did the same thing with the Nazis. They had Otto Strasser, who said that I'm the true Nazi, right? And that this was a propaganda technique that was used, right? That, they did have broadcasts into the Soviet Union denouncing communism, but they also had Trotskyite broadcasts into the Soviet Union saying, well, the Soviet Union has broken with real communism, and the real communists are in the West following Trotsky. Well, they did that to Nazi Germany also. They had anti-Nazi broadcasts, but then they also had broadcasts saying Nazism's great, but Hitler's abandoned real Nazism, and the real Nazi is Otto Strasser, which I think is fascinating. So, that's all you ever needed to know about Hitler. It's much more complicated. It's about degrowth and it's about economics. And again, if Hitler had never been born, it would have been somebody else, as many people have pointed out. It was based on the breakdown of capitalism. And it was based on the fact that Germany had been an imperialist country that had been stripped of its colonies after World War I. And that I maintain that the reason that there was a big tactical mistake that the German communists made, which is after World War I, Germany didn't have any colonies anymore. It was not an imperialist country anymore. They weren't even allowed to have a military under the Versailles Treaty, and they were subjected to national humiliation. They had to pay taxes that would go to France as reparations. And they were subjected to national humiliation. Parts of their country were occupied by foreign troops, etc. And so there was a faction within the Communist Party of Germany that said Germany is now an oppressed nation and that we should fight for socialism in Germany, not as a class struggle of the workers against the bosses, but as a struggle for national liberation. And they were defeated. Stalin wasn't going to have it, and they were defeated. And the German Communist Party didn't take that position. And so the Nazis were the ones who were able to carry and tap into the resentment that Germans felt on the basis of their national liberation, right? That they were, the Germans were being attacked and humiliated as Germans. And so Hitler came in and said, I'm going to make Germany a mighty imperialist power again. Well, if the Germans are constantly being told you're bad because you're a German, and they're subjected to national humiliation, they're more likely to follow a message of we're going to reassert our national pride. And if the communists had been able to be the ones to say, well, Germany is now a colony and an oppressed nation, and fought for socialism and anti-imperialism in Germany on the basis of being an oppressed nation, they may have been able to take power. But they didn't do that. And the reason that they didn't do that, I think, was largely because of the fact that industrial unions were such a big part of communism in these days. Nowadays, industrial unions in the West are very, very weak. But back then, workers in factories who formed unions and organized against their bosses, that was what socialism and communism was all about back then. It was the worker, the proletarian, versus the capitalist, the proletarian versus the bourgeoisie, or and the Communist Party of Germany was a labor-oriented political movement. So for them to change their whole orientation and be like Mao in China, fighting for a new China, for a national democratic revolution against the imperialists, didn't make sense, right? But there were people within the German Communist Party that wanted them to do that. And honestly, if somehow the German Communist Party had been able to be the ones to, defend Germans on a national basis, the Nazis wouldn't have been able to capture that anger, and history might have been different. There's a lot that is written trying to tell us that the reason Hitler took power is because social democrats and communists were fighting with each other. That's not true. That's a misconception. And the Communist Party of Germany was the party of the desperately poor and unemployed, and the Social Democrats of Germany were the ruling party for the most of the Weimar Republic, and they had killed many communist leaders, and the Social Democrats and the communists were not going to unite, and people in both parties wanted that and tried to push for it. It never happened. And so that myth that gets promoted by Trotsky and others, that if only the Social Democrats and the communists had come together, they could have blocked Hitler. Yeah, maybe that's true, but they wouldn't have. There was no way that was going to happen. And it wasn't just that they just didn't do it, right? That became a vote for Biden and vote for Kamala Harris argument, by the way. I don't know how anyone thinks the German Social Democrats of the 1930s have anything to do with Kamala Harris, but that was the argument that Vosch and other people were using to say vote for Kamala Harris is, Trump is Hitler. Well, Trump is not Hitler. Trump is an awful president, but he's not Hitler. And Trump is not Hitler. This isn't the 1930s in Germany, and the Democrats are certainly not the Social Democrats of Germany. So the whole analogy is wrong, but a lot of that was being trotted out by leftist YouTube. This idea that, the communists and the Social Democrats couldn't unite, and that's how Hitler came to power. So that's why you got to vote for the Democrats. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Anyhow, but there's more to this very long question the person sent in. They said, in Russia today, a lot of Jews support Israel. Why? I don't know. I haven't met Jewish folks in Russia. I couldn't tell you. I mean, generally, Russia is quite critical of Israel. That's not been the case for most of recent history, but in the last 2-3 years, Russia and Israel are really not getting along. They still have diplomatic relations, and there are a lot of Russian-speaking Israelis that are fans of the Russian government. But I don't. When I go to Russia, they don't take me to synagogues. I don't ask people's opinions there. So I do know that after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a rise of anti-Semitism in the 90s. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. And part of that was blaming Jews for the fall of the Soviet Union, because the U.S. government had put sanctions on Russia because of the alleged oppression of Soviet Jews. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, most Jewish folks, as the country was falling apart, mass unemployment, the 90s were a very, very bad time in Russia's history. A lot of Jewish folks just packed up and went to Israel. And many Russians that were not Jewish resented that. And so on that basis, with the Western countries accusing Russia of being anti-Semitic, for supporting the Palestinians, for allegedly oppressing Soviet Jews by outlawing circumcision and things like that, putting sanctions on Russia for allegedly being anti-Semitic, with a lot of Jews then packing up and leaving and going to Israel. You combine all of that, there was kind of a rise of anti-Semitism. The other thing that happened was that after the fall of the Soviet Union, they had an election in Russia in 1993, and they elected a parliament, or a Duma, that wanted to stop Boris Yeltsin's devastating economic reforms. The economic policies of Boris Yeltsin were very, very bad. And so they elected a coalition government called the National Salvation Coalition. And it included the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and a number of Russian nationalist political parties, some of which were anti-Semitic. But the Russian people didn't vote for them because they were anti-Semitic. They voted for them to stop austerity, because Russia's economy was being looted in the 1990s. And in 1993, the new parliament took office, the Duma, and Boris Yeltsin dissolved the parliament and used his power as the leader to dissolve the parliament and declare a state of emergency. And that was seen as a very undemocratic move. And the parliamentarians refused to leave, and so the parliament was shelled. And it was the constitutional crisis of Russia in 1993. A lot of people got killed. 187 people were killed. It was a bloodbath, and the parliament building was shelled by the Russian military. It was a disaster. What was the language that Boris Yeltsin used to justify what he did? He called it, he said that the Russian parliament was a red-brown alliance. That was the language that he used. He said it was a red-brown alliance. And he said this is communists and Nazis together, and they're anti-Semitic. And that was the language that was used. So on that basis, in the 90s, there was very much there was a rise of anti-Semitism in Russia during those years. So that might be why, I don't know that that's actually true, though, right? One thing that is worth pointing out is that in Russia, you have the world's largest menorah. It's not in Israel, it's in Russia, because there was something called the Jewish Autonomous Region that was created in the 1930s. They created a national territory for Jews in the Soviet Union. And that was a response to Zionism, right? The Zionists were saying Jews should go to Israel. Stalin and the Soviet government said, no, we're going to create a national territory in the Soviet Union, the Jewish Autonomous Region. And it's no longer, I believe it's not majority Jewish at this point, but the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, was part of the Soviet Union's effort to respond to Zionism, which is very fascinating. So again, history is often very, very, very nuanced and complicated. And I do see that someone sent a super chat, which I appreciate. And I see Luke is thanking me for having me on. I'm really glad that Luke came on. I thought it was really, really great to have Luke come on. And, I do attend Manhattan Family Church every Sunday. It's a great group of people, and they don't agree with me on a lot of things. And, I am learning, and that I spent the first 15 years of my adult life in the communist movement. And I am at the point that I've realized that there is something deeply wrong spiritually with what calls itself the left, right? I very much believe in socialism and anti-imperialism, but leftism as a philosophy is a philosophy that emphasizes libidinal and Oedipal feelings, right? It's kill your parents and unleash your rage and desire for revenge and your sexual impulses. And that I see that there's something spiritually problematic about that. And I view Trotskyism and Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution as kind of the ultimate expression of that. And that I view that beginning with Stalin, there was kind of a spiritual shift in communism. And when I go to communist countries and anti-imperialist countries, I don't see leftism. I see love of community, love of nation. I see something that has a different spiritual quality. So I am on a journey of learning, and the fact that so many unificationists have been patient with me and have been willing to cooperate with me around issues like peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, have come to CPI gatherings and been friendly with CPI members and had an open mind, that means the world to me. And so I think very highly of the unification community, and the fact that they've been subjected to so much persecution, and that, that they survive. And, I am open. I believe we should be willing to work with anyone who will work for similar causes. And where, when it comes to building the Bering Sea Tunnel, connecting the United States with Russia via Alaska, they're some of the biggest advocates of doing that, along with Lyndon LaRouche, along with other voices. When it comes to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, I am not ashamed of my relationship with the unificationists. And, honestly, there's a whole lot I could say about it. So thank you, Luke, for coming on. It was really an honor to have you on. And I want to do anything I can to support Dr. Hak Ja Han, who has been such an important friend of North Korea. Also, I want to thank Race Car K. Race Car K said, "Hey, Caleb, your live stream from last Monday, all about economics, was really interesting. I might watch it again this weekend. Have a good night. Well, it's going to premiere on this channel. Not premiere. It'll go up on Monday as a standalone video. I'm glad you liked it. The slideshow format that I use is very popular and has been a very, very popular format that I've used on this channel. So I'm glad you liked it. It'll be a standalone video that'll go up on Monday. And I'll be live Saturday night for sure. Saturday night is a really big night on YouTube, on this channel at least. So I'll be live tomorrow night. But yeah, and I guess the last part of the question from the anonymous person said, why is it anti-Semites in America see the Bolshevik Revolution as a great tragedy, even those who are smartish about Iran and Venezuela? I think it's because of the fact that that after the Russian Revolution, there was so much anti-religious terror, right? That there was destruction of churches, that there was retaliation against the church because the church had been, the Tsar of Russia was also the Pope, right? He was the head of the church. And that because the early years of the Russian Revolution had so much anti-religious sentiment involved, I think that that's part of it. I think it's also due to the fact that, the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution were really, really bad years in Russia's history. Okay. Now, as much as the 90s were bad in Russia, they weren't the early 1920s in Russia, when 15 different countries invaded them to try and put down the Russian Revolution, the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War was a pretty awful thing. Okay. And Russia lost a lot of territory at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and that Russian nationalists view that period when Lenin was leading the Soviet Union, before the death of Lenin, before the rise of Stalin, that they view that period as one of the worst times in their history. And that was the time when they were espousing a much more purely Bolshevik line. Okay. And there was a lot of persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church during those years. And the Russian Orthodox Church is a really big part of Russia's national identity. And especially since, the rise of Putin, they talk about the new Russian patriotism that admires Stalin for defeating the Nazis, but also takes pride in the Russian Orthodox Church as part of Russia's unique identity. And so if you view things from the perspective of what's good for Russia, the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution was not a good time. The national symbol of Russia, which is the Russian Orthodox Church, was being persecuted. You can understand that people that might see things from kind of a Russian nationalist perspective would view the Bolshevik Revolution in a negative light. And that, again, I do believe that when Stalin came in, there was a shift in how the global communist movement operated. I think that Trotsky was right, that in some ways, Stalin moved away from classical Marxist ideology, but I think that was a good thing, right? And that's where CPI is kind of unique, right? I think that Stalin moving the Soviet Union away from the classical Marxist approach was good. So yeah, there you go. Now, another buy me a coffee came from Gavin. Gavin from CPI said, I know Russia has a lot of public ownership in the economy since Putin renationalized some industries. Does Russia also have 5-year plans? I don't believe they call them 5-year plans. I don't think they have 5-year plans. They do have a large amount of economic planning because a lot of the Russian economy, the bulk of the Russian economy, is subsidized by oil and gas revenue, right? They sell a lot of oil and they sell a lot of natural gas, and it's the revenue from that goes into the hands of the state that then is used to subsidize and other industries, right? Russia has a very vibrant titanium industry, right? They have a very vibrant steel industry. They make weapons in Russia, the S-400 missiles. Russia makes a lot, but a lot of Russia's national industries are subsidized by oil and gas money. And so because those industries are relying on a subsidy that is from state-controlled oil and gas revenue, there's a lot of central planning, right? Because that oil and gas revenue is being strategically dispensed by the state. And that's very clear. And then if you look at Russia's economy, it's a lot like China's economy. And that's, Russian President Putin has talked about that, right? He met with Deng Xiaoping's daughter, and China was studied by Russia as they were rebuilding Russia's economy. Singapore was also studied in Lee Kuan Yew's economic system in Singapore. Singapore has had a very effective and strong economy, and it's largely due to heavy state involvement, and that Russia does not fit Western political categories, right? People in America think Russia is right-wing. What does right-wing mean? They are, in some ways, what we think of as right-wing in America. Gay marriage? Nope. Right. They do have the homosexual propaganda law that, you can't talk about homosexuality in any way that might be seen as promoting it toward children. They really emphasize the traditional family. They have the traditional values visa. And there is a real big emphasis on their national pride and loyalty to the country's history and the Russian Orthodox Church and the Soviet Union's heroic defeat of the Nazis in World War II, etc. So all of that, I guess you could say, is right wing. However, their economy is not right wing at all. First of all, they have paid maternity leave for 2 years. If you're a Russian citizen and you have a baby as a woman, you get 2 years of paid maternity leave. On top of that, if you are a Russian citizen, they have national health care that's provided. The government provides health care to the population. On top of that, oil and gas, their major industries, are nationalized, right? None of that is conservative, right? And I'm happy that anyone supports Russia, okay? Because Russia is so hated and demonized in America. I'm happy that anybody supports Russia, left wing, right wing, or otherwise. But it does annoy me a little bit because there's there's a layer of what they call like ortho bros. It's a trend among American right wing guys. And they like Russia and they convert to being Russian Orthodox largely, right? Because they view it as kind of an esoteric religion, which, I mean, the Russian Orthodox tradition is, it's got all kinds of, it's very different from Western Christianity. But there's ortho bro LARPers. And they tend to be guys who grew up in evangelical Protestant fundamentalist Christian families. And now that the right wing is no longer the mainstream in America, because it used to be the right wing was the normal position and left wing was kind of, you were a little bit dissident if you were left wing. Not like that anymore. Now left wing is the prevailing position. Most young people, the default position in America is woke. All the big corporations have rainbow flags. The wokeification that's happened since the Obama years, now left wing is the default position. So the right wing is increasingly esoteric and edgy. So you have a layer of young guys who grew up as American conservatives, and they're still conservatives, but now that being a conservative is esoteric and edgy, they've discovered a way to be esoteric and edgy is to be convert to Russian Orthodoxy and admire Russia from a conservative perspective. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, I like the fact that anyone likes Russia in America, I think is a good thing. However, they then, at the same time that they, sympathize with Russia, they will repeat American anti-communism as if that is the Russian position. And it's not, I mean, in Russia, there are monuments to Solzhenitsyn. There are museums showing the gulags and how awful it was to be in a gulag. I mean, Russia does not deny that awful things went on in the Soviet period. And there is especially a feeling that the anti-Christianity of the Russian Orthodox Church was awful. But largely, Soviet nostalgia is very high in Russia. They are proud of what the Soviet Union achieved. And they are proud, and Stalin is considered a national hero. Stalin is very, very popular in Russia these days because he's viewed as someone who built the country up into a superpower. And the narrative that Americans have is not that gulags were bad. I agree that gulags were bad. The narratives that Americans have is not that the Russian Orthodox Church was persecuted. That was wrong. The narrative that Americans have is that communism just never worked anywhere. And every country that ever adopted a centrally planned economy, they were all starving and miserable because you have to have free market capitalism. That's not true. The Soviet Union became a superpower. They became a world industrial superpower with socialism. They wiped out illiteracy. They built the world's largest power plants and the world's largest steel mills. They electrified the whole country. Some things are true and some things are not. And if you say the Soviet Union, it just doesn't work because you have to have neoliberal free market capitalism, that's not statistically true. And, the University of California, Berkeley keeps GDP, gross domestic product records for every country in the world. And you can read their records of gross domestic product expansion in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was constantly becoming more productive. Living standards were constantly going up. The way that people lived in the 1930s in Russia was head and shoulders above the way they lived in the 1910s. In the 1910s, most people in Russia didn't have running water and electricity. They lived in huts without running water and electricity, these little huts that didn't even have heat. And in the 1930s, they lived in modern apartment buildings with modern bathrooms and modern heating and modern showers. And I mean, it was like a completely different country. And this is something that American conservatives, it's like, does not compute. Part of American conservatism is this kind of dumb worship of capitalism, this belief that capitalism, free market neoliberalism, right, not just capitalism, right, but free market policies are always the best, and that no socialist centrally planned economy has ever achieved anything ever, and that this kind of economic flim-flam that is promoted by Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek and others, that's a big part of American conservatism. Globally, that's not part of conservatism, right? For example, right, just today, I saw on social media people promoting the very famous photo. It was Donald Rumsfeld who popularized it, of the Korean Peninsula at night. Look at South Korea, it's all lit up. Look at North Korea, it's all dark. See, capitalism and the free market is better than communism. Well, there's a couple problems with that. But the biggest problem with that, and the most obvious problem, is that there is no way you can describe South Korea's economy and the economic expansion that South Korea has experienced in the 1970s and 80s as free market. It's not, right? Park Chung-hee, who was the military dictator of South Korea in the 1960s and 70s, and he was shot and killed in 1979. Park Chung-hee created government-controlled corporations, and he used the military to build up huge state-run monopolies like POSCO, the steel industry, like Hyundai, the car company, like Samsung, the electronics manufacturer. That's not free market. If the government says we're going to create one car company and we're going to use the military and we're going to use government money and government funding and we're all going to come together and create one state monopoly on cars, that's not free market capitalism. Okay? I'm not saying it's communism. It's definitely not communism, but it's not free market capitalism. And the way South Korea's economy was built was not free market. It was state controlled. It was Bonapartism, military Bonapartism. And it was very similar to the economic policies of what you call dirigism in France. Charles de Gaulle had similar economic policies for France, dirigism. But, and that's the same for all the Asian tiger countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, the government on Taiwan, the island of Taiwan. These countries don't have free market economies. And it is utter deception to claim, that these countries, the way they became rich proves that you have to privatize everything and have the free market. No, these countries, first of all, they weren't barricaded. North Korea is barricaded. And that photo from Donald Rumsfeld was from like 2004, after North Korea had really been devastated by the fall of the Soviet Union. They were completely barricaded by the world. They were really suffering. And yeah, at that point, they weren't as electrified as South Korea was. That's true. I mean, a lot of what North Korea has is underground because of bombings and stuff like that, so part of it is that North Korea is more mountainous, and they've made a big effort to put a lot of their stuff under the ground because they don't want to be bombed and they don't want to be spied on by satellites and all that. But part of it is just, they were not as developed as South Korea, and they still aren't. And that's because they were barricaded. They were devastated by the fall of the Soviet Union. Whereas the Asian tiger countries like South Korea, Singapore, and all that, they were not isolated. They were not barricaded. The fall of the Soviet Union didn't devastate them. The West heavily invested in them. And then they had state central planning with military governments that built them up. And when people present South Korea as proof that the free market is always the answer, it's infuriating to me. The very same people that would tell you Obamacare is full communism, or would tell us that we have communism in New York City now because Mamdani says he's going to give us free buses. I don't see any free buses. We don't have them, but New York City is full communism, I guess, right? Because we had a rent freeze and because, Mamdani is giving free buses. But South Korea is pure capitalism. That's not rational. Right. And some things are true and some things are not. And that it is just infuriating. And when people say the Soviet Union had no successes, that is not true. Russia and China both became superpowers with centrally planned economies under the leadership of communist parties. That is economic fact. There is no way you can dispute that. Look at what China was before the Communist Party took power. Look at what China is today. Look at what Russia was in 1917, and look at what Russia was in the 1930s. Look at what Russia was in the 1960s. You cannot claim that communism just never worked and everyone was starving the whole time. That's just, you can't say that. Some things are true, some things are not. And I get very frustrated. This debate that's happening on social media right now about communism. Look, I am the first to tell you that, like I said, I think there's something deeply spiritually wrong with the left. There is absolutely something deeply spiritually wrong with what calls itself leftism. But that said, there are some things that are true and some things that are not. And the idea that communism, socialism has never worked anywhere, that's just not true. The idea that free market capitalism brings prosperity, that is definitely not true. In the 1990s, they tried to have free market capitalism in Russia, and it was an absolute disaster. And Putin fixed it by putting oil and gas under public ownership. And that, economic realities exist, and that, the Soviet Union had a lot of problems, but the idea that they were all just poor and starving and they never accomplished anything, that's not true. They became superpowers under state central planning. And then in the 90s, they implemented free market reforms and it wrecked the place. And then under Putin's leadership, they reasserted state control and things got better. And China, right? China built its first power plants and its first, storm levees, and it built that under the leadership of the Communist Party. And then, the Communist Party, built the first steel mills. The Communist Party laid that foundation. And then they had the reform and opening up in 1978. And there was a lot more market reforms and foreign investment, which was a good thing. But it still remained a largely state-run economy. And if you go to China today, it's about 50% state ownership. And private companies don't have freedom to just do whatever the market dictates. They don't follow the invisible hand. Private companies are told what they can and cannot do by the government all the time. The idea that China, the only reason that they had success is because they're capitalist. Again, these very same people will tell you Obamacare is communism, Mamdani's New York City is communism. But China, where half of the entire economy is state-run, where the government has 5-year economic plans, where private companies are told what to do, where the ruling party espouses Marxism-Leninism as its ideology, that's capitalism. But New York City is communism, but Obamacare is communism. And it is infuriating to me that these people, the conservatives that are ranting against communism, can't even make up their mind about what it is. For example, right? This is another thing that they will say. After the fall of the Eastern Bloc, all these people, where did they go? After the Berlin Wall came down, they all ran. They all went to Western Europe, to capitalism. Wait a second. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, West Germany had national health care. West Germany had free public education. Britain had national health care. France, all the things that they say are communism, they had in Western Europe, right? They say Bernie Sanders is a communist because he wants free healthcare and free education. Well, if you're saying that Western Europe was better than Eastern Europe, Western Europe had all of those things that you say are communism, right? So if you think that Bernie Sanders is a communist, Western Europe was far more Bernie Sanders in the 90s when people were going there. So if your argument is communism is bad and Western capitalism in Europe is good, Europe had all the things. It's not an argument for free markets. I mean, it's they can't make up their minds. Sometimes communism is, free healthcare. Sometimes communism is the post office. They can't make up their minds. Another thing that's infuriating is if you ever point to any of the problems that we have, they say, well, America's not really capitalist. America's not really capitalist. Well, if America's not really capitalist, why are you always saying that America's success is because of capitalism? Right? They say, well, America's not really capitalist. We're socialist. Oh, well, so do you disavow all of America's achievements? You're not. Oh, but you'll count those achievements when you're arguing that they can't make up their minds. The goalpost is constantly moving. What is capitalism? What is socialism? Whatever's convenient for the argument. And I find it very frustrating. And I also find the arrogance of a lot of the people online to be very frustrating because none of them have ever bothered to consider any of this, but they don't ever talk as if they have anything to learn, right? Debate in which no one is learning anything is not productive debate. When it's just finger pointing, and that's what so much of our politics in America is right now. It is just finger pointing, right? And I think that's kind of what Luke was getting at, even though his views are very different than mine on many issues, right? That's what he was getting at. People just point fingers at his church all the time. Well, you don't learn anything by pointing fingers, right? And that our politics in America, a lot of our politics is you're bad, blah, blah, blah. No, you're bad, blah, blah, blah. And nobody stops and says, okay, what do you actually believe? Why do you believe it? No one says that, right? And then nobody learns, right? And I am intellectually curious. I want to know, right? I don't agree with fascism, but I have read many fascist books and I know what fascists believe. I do not agree with libertarianism and free market ideology, but I have read many free market books and I know what they believe. And what I find to be infuriating in our culture, and this is true for both sides, is there's a lack of interest in what the other side believes, why they believe it. But people immediately decide, if you disagree with me, it's because you have a character flaw. You are a bad person. And therefore, I'm superior to you and I don't have to listen to you. And generally, I mean, yeah, people's character does influence their politics. That said, though, largely people think what they think because of information they've been presented with, right? It's when information is presented and people refuse to believe it, that's when you can start reading into people's character. But until you've sat down with somebody and said, look, this is what I think. What do you think? And you've challenged what they've said with information. Until you've done that, you are in no position to opine about their character politically. You're not, right? Because as far as you know, they just disagree. They just have different information. There are times where I have opined about people's character or psychology in regards to their political beliefs. I'm not saying I'm above doing that. I have done it, but it's generally based on conversations where I have given my perspective and given my information. I've criticized their perspective with information. And it's based on what their reaction to that is. And, it's very interesting. We've changed a lot as a culture. Part of it is that I live in New York City now. New York City is a very, very liberal place. And I grew up in Ohio, which is a very conservative place. I mean, the part of Ohio I grew up in, the little town I grew up in, was very, very conservative. And I grew up in a very conservative time during the Bush years, the Clinton years when I was really little, and the Bush years when I was in high school. And so because of that, I I guess I just don't deal with conservatives as much as I used to, but I think our culture has largely changed. You know, conservatives are not the same. Being a conservative is much more of an edgy position to take now. You know, conservatives are different in the way they present themselves, and liberal, I think, is largely, even in Ohio and the place I grew up, is much more the default position. I went to a college in Ohio that was quite conservative. It was in the west side of Cleveland. A lot of business majors, a lot of sports medicine majors, Baldwin Wallace College, awful college. I do not recommend anyone go there, right? Somebody in the chat was trying to get my goat, somebody who didn't like me. And they said, I'm not going to donate to this college. It's like, oh boy, ouch, that hurts. You know, I would never encourage anyone to donate to that college at this point. You know, but, you know, it was a colossal waste of a lot of time and money on my part. But that said, you know, I was surrounded by a lot of conservatives. One thing that I noticed growing up around conservatives was that there was a certain character flaw that I saw, not universally, but in people that were very, very drawn to conservative politics and were, how do I put this, that I would argue with them. This message was not brought to you by Baldwin Wallace. Yeah, that would argue with you, and you would say things and they would say things back. And that I noticed that there was very, very much on the part of some conservatives that I would argue with. There was a feeling that empathy is weakness. And that wasn't universal. Right. That wasn't universal. There were many people that were conservative because they were just evangelicals, and their church was a really big part of their identity. And they were against gay marriage for religious reasons. They were against abortion for various reasons. And they didn't really care about economics. They didn't know about economics. They didn't care about it. And especially some of those people, and this is true, there's a lot of people that I knew when I was in college who were studying psychology, were studying because they wanted to be social workers and all of that, who were evangelicals. But when you talk to them about economics, because of what they had to learn to go into the social sciences, and they actually had left-wing economic views, which I think is very interesting. I wonder where those people are today. You know, there were a lot of people I knew that were very, very, I guess you could call it right-wing, because they were religious, and being religious was, you know, that was a community that cared about people and taught compassion. And so they went into, you know, to be a social worker, to be a teacher, to work with children and stuff. And often I found with those folks, when we didn't talk about social issues, when we weren't talking about abortion, when we weren't talking about gay marriage, when we weren't talking about social issues, and we weren't talking about emotionally loaded topics like patriotism or the military, when we were just talking about economics, often they were much more interested in left-wing economic ideas, which was very interesting. But there was a certain type of like business major, sports medicine major guy, and women too, that I would encounter. They had this how do I put this? There was this feeling that if I ever sympathize with the downtrodden, right, if I ever sympathize with someone who's the underdog, I'm doing something wrong. And that they would get angry at anyone they perceived of as a victim, or talking about their life as if it's been unfair. Right. It was kind of interesting. It was like, you know, if you were doing a presentation about, you know, racism, if you were doing a presentation about, you know, low income or poverty, they would get visibly triggered and angry. And it was like, this isn't real. How dare you? You know, there's no such thing as that. And they would get very, very defensive and angry. And it wasn't just about race. It was about anything where you're describing people having an unfair shake in life, and they would get very triggered by it. You know, and it actually reminds me now of what I see from left-wing people. A lot of left-wing people are the opposite, that if they hear anyone questioning or not agreeing with the latest kind of trendy social media outrage related to somebody being oppressed, they get triggered and outraged. And I remember that. I mean, that was one thing. But again, that came from arguments. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I took a teaching program. I was, getting college credit to learn to be a teacher. At one point, I thought I might want to be a teacher. That's not the way my life went, but, it was a college credit program I signed up for my senior year of high school. And I remember, part of learning to be a teacher is you have to learn about how poverty impacts children's ability to learn, because it does. Children growing up in poverty impacts their ability to learn. And there was this girl in my class who was a conservative, and we were watching the teacher giving a lecture to this college level course, about, children in poverty have harder times learning to read. Children in poverty are more exposed to bad chemicals. Children in poverty, just about how if you are from a poor family, your ability to learn is impacted by it, right? Proper nutrition, all kinds of things, right? And she was visibly triggered. I didn't say anything. Keep in mind, I was known to my classmates in high school as being a radical leftist, whatever, but I didn't say anything throughout the class. And so she was just like visibly upset by what she was hearing. And so then, the teacher said, and that's why we do have programs like Head Start, was describing some of the efforts. She ended the class by describing some of the social programs that have been created to try and deal with this problem of, children who come from poverty having a much harder time in this world. As she started showing about the Head Start program and about, different programs, she got this grin on her face. And in the middle of the class, she looked at me and she shouted, "I told you America's not evil, Caleb." And I was just like, what? And that's a moment where you can read into someone's character, right? That's a moment where that's not just what information she has. She was visibly upset because America could not, no, poverty is not real and all of that. And she was visibly upset hearing it. And then she found an excuse not to believe it. No, there's social programs, so it doesn't count. And then she shouted at me from across the room. And that was very interesting for me. And I think it's right. I think I'm justified in reading into her character. Rachel knows what I'm talking about, right? I think I'm justified in reading into her character, right? She had a real fear. She had a real fear of empathizing with the downtrodden. And that's a lot of, at least my experience with conservatives growing up, that was a lot of a character trait I associated with them, but not universally, right? But at the same time, now, one thing I see among left-wing people, I mean, there's this trend they call cry bullies or whatever, that, they see a video on social media of something that is unfair. And sometimes, most of the time it's real, not all the time. Sometimes videos misrepresent things and they just get really, really upset. And if you say, well, okay, but, oh, how dare you? No, don't you understand? This is so unfair. How dare you? How dare you? There's that, right? And that goes on. And it's actually very similar. But they're not triggered by the same thing. Right? It's the conservatives would be triggered by any notion that somebody can be downtrodden or oppressed, etc. A lot of the left-wing people, it's like they're triggered by any notion that you would question people being downtrodden or oppressed or anything. And, and the reason that I have had trouble getting along with those kind of folks is because I have certain, my beliefs are not emotional. My beliefs, I mean, in some ways you could say they are, but my beliefs, especially about economics, are about economics, right? I don't think, and this is one thing that is totally true, I don't think people should be advocating socialism on the basis of rich people have more wealth than we have, and that's no fair, right? Anything you do in life that is based on jealousy, somebody else has it better than me, screw them, is not coming from a good place. I believe we should have a centrally planned economy so that everyone can become wealthy, so that wealth and abundance can grow in big numbers. And my criticism of our current economic setup is not that somebody's richer than me and that's no fair. It's that the people are wealthy in a way that makes other people poor, right? That we have an economic setup where where, you know, we have corporations that are making money, you know, in prisons for profit. We have, you know, big companies like Sackler getting rich off people getting addicted to opioids, that our country is being hollowed out economically while international bankers are enriching themselves, and we're going around and fighting wars around the world that don't benefit us. And, you know, but my beef with the rich and powerful is not that they're rich, not even really necessarily that they're powerful. It's that they're rich and their wealth and power comes at everyone else's expense. And that I'm not jealous of them for being wealthy. I don't think we should have a setup where people get rich at other people's expense. And I don't think we should have an economic system where the more abundance that is created and the more technology advances, the poorer people get. That's not what should exist. Okay. And that's not emotional, right? That's my understanding of certain economic theories. And leftists get mad at me a lot because they want me to jump on the bandwagon of the latest emotional thing. You know, it was like in the lead up to the special military operation. It was like 2019, 2020, 2021. I started getting canceled all the time. I became everyone's favorite, you know, punching bag on Twitter. And I would get canceled for saying all kinds of things. I talked about socialist billionaires, right? I said, look, I want everyone to be a billionaire. The higher stage of communism, as Marx understood it, is based on vast abundance, right? And that abolish billionaires is not a good slogan because it implies that there's something wrong with a measurement of wealth. The problem with the billionaires in our world is that their wealth has come by making other people poor. It's not that they have money. It's that they have money at the expense in an economic system where they get that money by making other people poor. And we want vast wealth for all. You know, in the Middle Ages, to have a mirror was a very, very rare thing. And so if I had existed in the year 1400, would I be going around saying abolish mirrors, right? Abolish mirrors. If everyone can't have a mirror, nobody should. No, I would want to fight for the kind of world we have today where everyone can have a mirror, right? That's what we need to have. And if you have the attitude of like, well, somebody has it good and I want them to suffer in the same way I've suffered, you're in a bad place. I was also canceled for saying socialism with American characteristics. What's wrong with that? Every country that has ever had a socialist economic system, it has been unique for that country, right? Socialism with Chinese characteristics, Juche in North Korea, Bothism, but yet I guess being a socialist in America means you're supposed to hate America. Again, it's that libidinal thing. It's not about wanting an economic system that will be rationally organized. No, it's about, showing everyone how mad you are and showing everyone how much you hate this country and it's racist and all that. So socialism with American characteristics, I was canceled for that. Yeah. It was just, they would just go after me for everything because I take this seriously. And I think these things through, and I don't jump on social media bandwagons, right? Gabby says, how did you deal with the smoke in the air yesterday? I don't know. I mean, I inhaled some of it. I mean, it didn't make me sick. I will say some people it actually gave headaches to and all of that. And I remember before, I was, feeling ill the last time this happened, but, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And I was worried I would get physically sick, but I didn't. So I didn't, one time I made the mistake of going to a hookah bar and hanging out with friends, and I was fine when I was there. And then when I got home, I vomited because I'd inhaled so much smoke at the hookah bar. And I wasn't smoking myself, but I just inhaled all the smoke by being in the hookah bar for 3 or 4 hours, and I ended up vomiting. Right. So, and I think the last time there was a big smoke over New York City, I did get ill. I'm sorry to hear that you got ill, Gabby. Oh my God. I remember Ryan Grimm pile-on that happened after he reported the bad journalism. Yeah. Yeah. The Graham Plattner thing, folks. I mean, look, it's not a hill I want to die on. It's really not a hill I want to die on. I have no reason, Hold on. I just have to send a message. But yeah, sorry, I just need to reply to CPI organizational matter. But yeah, the Graham Plattner thing, it's not the hill I want to die on, right? I did defend him when the initial wave of allegations were, that he was a bad boyfriend and he had a tattoo and stuff. And I was like, this is stupid. I mean, obviously the new allegation is more serious. I'm not sure I believe it though. I'm not sure I believe it. And, I don't know. I don't like this. And this is a trigger they can pull on anyone at any time. And I don't know. I mean, he disagreed with me on Ukraine when it came to the Ukraine conflict. And one of his biggest supporters, even now, is Stephen King, who was really awful on Ukraine. So, but I'm not the only one who I looked at, wave number 2 of allegations and said, really? I'm not the only one. And I saw Anna Kasparian and Young Turks, and I saw even the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, defending him and, and stuff. And I'm not going to go all in and go to bat for him, because it's just, he's out. I mean, he's done. I mean, it's over and whatever, not my battle to fight and all of that. But we live in a very scary world. The scariest thing about this world, and I think, again, this kind of came up in the interview with Luke, is that, it's all up to the mainstream media, right? It's all up to the mainstream media. The Catholic Church can have millions of molesting allegations and not be outlawed as a church. And his church can have some issues that they admit there was some issues with fundraising. And they lose their ability to operate as a church in Japan and have all their property seized. How's that fair? Right? It's like with all the allegations about child molesting in the Catholic Church, right? With all the allegations about child molesting in the Catholic Church and all of that, they're untouched. Whereas this other church, there's an allegation that they fundraised improperly and they've apologized for it and they've paid out money in lawsuits and what? And it's because mainstream media has decided, well, we're going to really sink this organization, and that's the thing. It's, if Graham Plattner's ex had made this allegation and mainstream media had said, no, we're not touching this, nothing would have happened. But mainstream media decided to run with it. And, we know Bill Clinton, there's plenty out there about Bill Clinton, and there's plenty out there that, Joe Biden, Tara Reid very credibly accused Joe Biden. I believe Tara Reid, and her story is very, very credible. The mainstream media said, oh, well, she supports Russia, so don't believe it. But yet, Graham Plattner, it's just mainstream media decides that the allegations are going to sink you or they don't, right? And it's just up to mainstream media whether they like you or not. And I guess I'm not surprised about mainstream media acting that way. What bothers me is that there are so many people who I don't get it, right? If you are opposed to imperialism, you're opposed to capitalism, why do you let mainstream media pick who's going to lead the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist movement? And this happens over and over and over again. The New York Times does a story about somebody and suddenly they're our leader, right? And it's like we're supposed to be against the mainstream media. We're supposed to be against the ruling class, but yet, we support, if the New York Times does a story about somebody, about somebody being a leftist, that's who our leader is going to be. And on top of that, we then dogpile and cancel people that are on our side. I see RT people targeted and all this, and it's like, I just, and it's frustrating. It's really, really frustrating to see people fall for it. Right. And that why are we letting what we know is the voice of our enemies tell us who should lead our movements, tell us what we should think of people on our own side. Why are we doing that? Right? I mean, but it's just a problem that I see, and it's just like, like if I were to support Graham Plattner or oppose Graham Plattner, the last thing that would influence my opinion about it would be an article in the New York Times. Oh, the New York Times doesn't like him. Oh boy, I better oppose Graham Plattner. Like, the New York Times doesn't agree with me about anything practically. So why would I, oh, well, the New York Times, I mean, why do I want to be on the same side as the New York Times? Right. And look, I don't want to get into details here. Right. But, there's very, very obviously a game going on right now. I mean, it's a much bigger game. Right. Years of lead. They're trying to control and manipulate dissidents in America right now. It's a lot like what they did in Italy during the 1970s to prevent the majority of Americans that are angry and want to end these wars and want to protect our freedoms and want a better economy from getting their way, to prevent a real populist mass movement that could change things. They're manipulating dissident circles, right? And they're doing all kinds of stuff to manipulate dissident circles, the killing of Charlie Kirk and the way that, the way that was done. And there's many different things. One of the things that they're doing is they're selecting via the social media algorithm who will lead dissident communities. And people fall for this. And I am just like, guys, right? I mean, I'm not a white nationalist, right? And so, I mean, I don't want white nationalism to do well, but like, if I was a white nationalist, that's one dissident community, right? Why in the world would I follow Nick Fuentes? Think about it. What has Nick Fuentes ever done to advance the cause of white nationalism? Nothing, right? Has Nick Fuentes ever led a white nationalist protest? Has Nick Fuentes ever built a white nationalist movement? Has he gotten elected to office? Why would you follow some adult man who looks like he's 12 and uses naughty words on the internet and insults people? Why would you follow Nick Fuentes, right? If you really believe in white nationalism, why would you follow Nick Fuentes? But loads of people do, because the New York Times wrote an article about him, because he gets boosted in the algorithm. And you'll notice a lot of what Nick Fuentes does is tear down other white nationalists and other anti-Zionist conservatives. And very interesting, isn't it? And that the way that they control dissident spaces, right? They consider white nationalists to be a dissident space, right? Again, people on the hard left will say, oh, all white nationalists are secretly agents of the ruling class. No, white nationalism is wrong. I'm not a white nationalist. I don't believe that there is a white nation. I don't believe whites are superior. I don't believe in any form of racial and ethnic bigotry. But the government, because of their position on Israel and because of a lot of different things, because those spaces are full of people that are against the American establishment and all of that, they consider them to be a dissident space. And the way the white nationalists are manipulated and controlled, that's happening to libertarians, and that's happening to anti-imperialists, the anti-imperialist left, anti-imperialists in general, right? And, again, if I was a libertarian, why would I listen to Dave Smith? What has Dave Smith ever done for libertarians? Has he ever gotten elected? No. Has he ever done anything? He's just a social media bro who's a libertarian. Right. And I was on a podcast with him where they had me argue about economics, and he rage quit, I mean, what has Dave Smith ever done? And the Rage Against the War Machine rally was happening, and he threw a hissy fit because Scott Ritter was going to be there. And then when Scott Ritter left the rally, he still didn't go. Right. Why would you listen to Dave Smith? If you really believe in libertarianism, what has Dave Smith done for libertarianism? Right? What has he ever done for libertarianism? You want libertarianism. Oh, and this guy who's really cool on the internet, who's a comedian, has gotten boosted on social media, and so we should listen to him. Why? Shouldn't you listen to somebody like Angela McHurdle, who's like built the Libertarian Party, organized the Rage Against the War Machine rally? Shouldn't you listen to somebody like Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute, who's organized the Ron Paul Institute? And shouldn't you? No, but listen to just this very good looking actor who's been hired on the internet, who conveniently opposes all real political activism for libertarianism. and gets all the big name interviews and is there and wages vicious, nasty cancel culture hate campaigns against the people that are actually doing serious libertarian organizing. Isn't that sketch? And the same things are happening in our spaces. And again, I'm glad you get this, Rachel. Again, what bothers me is not that it's happening. I would expect nothing less from the American government. What bothers me is that there are so many dissidents who go along with this, right? And it's like, well, so-and-so is really cool on the internet, and so I'm going to follow them. Are they organizing a movement for what you believe in? No. Do they do anything? Do they even understand these ideas? No. But they had an article about them in the New York Times. Oh, wow. Who controls the New York Times? Do you think that's because they think that they're a great anti-imperialist and they want to help anti-imperialism by letting us know about this great person? You think that's what's going on? And I see this. It's just like, oh, well, this person was in mainstream media, so that's who should lead our movement. And it's like, are you really this stupid? Are you really this stupid? And I see this over and over and over again, and it grinds my gears. It gets under my skin because people fall for it. And it's like, during the 1950s, right? We saw what happened with the Communist Party, how Operation Solo was used, and they put Morris Childs in charge of the Communist Party as an FBI agent, and the Communist Party was effectively neutered and controlled by the FBI, right? They could have outlawed it, but if they'd outlawed it, there would have been an underground Communist Party they couldn't control. So they legalized it, and they picked the leaders, right? And they knew exactly who Gus Hall was, and Morris Childs was a literal FBI informant, and they ran the Communist Party. The FBI ran the Communist Party for decades, right? And probably still does. Well, you think they're not doing the same thing now? You think that they're not playing games like this? And isn't it interesting that, people who cancel and smear and defame all the others in our dissident spaces somehow get to be the bosses of our movement and get, the social media, and mainstream media anoint them leaders of dissident communities? Isn't that strange? Isn't that a little bit strange? And they've never done any mass organizing. They've never built anything, but they just are really cool on the internet and they're blasted everywhere. And whenever somebody's organizing something like Rage Against the War Machine or whatever, they call it cringe and gay. And they just say, just stay home and watch me. But anyway, I could talk about that all night long. I really could. I did another RT report recently about JD Vance. And actually I will put that on. If anyone has any questions, we're getting towards the end of the stream. I've been going for, almost well over 3 hours now. We're past the 3-hour mark. So if you got any questions, you want to send another buy me a coffee or, send another super chat, it would be appreciated. But I did a report about JD Vance and Joe Rogan. JD Vance went on Joe Rogan's podcast. And so I did a story about that. I'm going to put that on. That was another RT report I did recently. So I'll put that on. And then if anyone has any more questions, I will answer them. And if not, I will say goodnight and be sure to tune in tomorrow because it's going to be good. I'm doing a lot tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to speak to a Russian university online at 5 a.m. Then tomorrow I'm going on a podcast at 8, and then I'll do this show at 9 tomorrow night. So it's going to be a full day tomorrow. So here we go.
London, Caleb Morpin takes a closer look.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance decided to sit down with Joe Rogan, one of America's most well-known podcasters, to make clear that he knows about the problems facing America, but he can't do anything to fix them.
But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there have been people within the Israeli government who are trying to, actually shift us away from that policy because they want to continue the military campaign. And by the way, there are people within their government that I love, I have good relationships with. I hope, and I don't think that they're part of this. I mean, You know, the ambassador of Israel to the United States, I think, is actually a really good guy. Obviously, he cares about Israel first. I care about America first. But there are some people within their system we know beyond a shadow of a doubt who are manipulating and trying to change American public opinion to keep the war going on indefinitely. Again, not towards any objective, but just indefinitely.
He is the second most powerful person in America, but he says Israel is blocking a deal with Iran and he can't do anything to stop them.
There's a lot of talk about how much is the Israeli government influencing American politics, and there are certainly certain people within the Israeli government who hate the deal, and we see exact evidence. There was a Times story that came out yesterday that basically there are certain influencers in America who are being paid in order to attack the deal.
According to J.D. Vance, a relatively tiny country has got its grip over a superpower.
It's a country of 9 million people. We have 330 million people. And so, of course, they're going to try to persuade Americans. They're going to try to move Americans in one direction or another. I think that's just the nature of the beast.
Vance is also saying what many maintained to be true for quite some time, despite flat-out denials from his administration. Yes, Jeffrey Epstein did indeed have intelligence connections.
Mossad or CIA or some other deep state, whether in America or Israel or another country, or both. You know, look, he clearly had connections to the highest levels of American intelligence. He clearly had connections to the highest levels of Israeli intelligence.
But even though that's clear to him, even as second in command to the president, he doesn't have access to information that can confirm that.
And yes, I've asked were there documents connecting Jeffrey Epstein directly to our intelligence agencies or anybody else's? And the answer is no. But if that existed, it wouldn't exist in 2026.
Poor J.D. Vance. There's just nothing he can do about it. Now, should we really buy this? It appears he's trying to scrub his hands of the unpopular activities of the administration he's serving in, probably so he can run for president himself. In our time, it seems like American politics is no longer just a farce, it's a charade. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
Yep, that was my report. Yeah, if anyone has anything else they would like to ask me, you know, this has been a nice long stream. I figured after Luke left, I would just stay on here because why not, right? I just come on here and have a chill stream, as they call it, a chill stream, where you just kind of show videos and talk about whatever comes to mind. And so, yeah, if anyone has anything else to ask, Gabby asked about the smoke. It was pretty bad. I didn't get sick though, which is good. But yeah, anything else to ask, buy me a coffee or super chat are the two ways we're taking questions here tonight. So yeah, send in anything you got. I guess I got to put like a video on about something to pass the time. I give you all one last chance to ask any questions. So what video should I put on? What video should I put on? I was looking there. Oh well. What should I put on? Oh, well, this is kind of amusing. This is a clip from a British television show that I found to be kind of amusing.
New tactical plan to ensure final victory in the field.
Would this brilliant plan involve us climbing out of our trenches and walking very slowly towards the enemy, sir?
How could you possibly know that, Blackadder? It's classified information.
It's the same plan that we used last time, and the 17 times before that.
Exactly! And that is what is so brilliant about it. It will catch the watchful Hun totally off guard. Doing precisely what we've done 18 times before is exactly the last thing they'll expect us to do this time.
Yeah. And I saw that clip and I immediately thought of a lot of the American leftist organizations, right? They've been doing the exact same thing for decades and yeah, taking them by surprise. If we do the exact same thing, I thought that was amusing. You know, it's important to have new ideas. It's important to be innovative. It's important to not be in a rut. So there you go. What else? All right. What else could I put on while I'm waiting for you all to send more questions? Well, this was an interesting video that was on the internet many, many years ago. It was like someone took Schoolhouse Rock and they did it like for a Noam Chomsky book. I don't know. I think I've shown this on here before, but I kind of enjoy it. It's a catchy tune. And they took the Noam Chomsky book, Pirates and Emperors, and they made a Schoolhouse Rock video. Should I put that on? Should I put that on? Maybe I won't put that on. For some reason, I guess I just didn't want to put that on. So what should I put on? What should I put on? Here, I'll put the Pirates and Emperors on. What the heck, right? We're not Noam Chomsky fans here very much. I've been quite critical of Chomsky, but hey, what the heck? We'll put this on.
Well, our story begins, you know, with old St. Augustine. Way back in days of old, he reported on this theme. A mighty emperor had caught himself a pirate who was terrorizing people who were sailing on the open seas.
What meanest thou by keeping hostile possession of the sea? What meanest thou by seizing the whole earth? Because I do it with a petty ship, I'm called a robber, whilst thou, who does the same with a great fleet, art styled emperor.
And old St. Augustine thought that was a pretty smart answer, 'cause there are pirates and emperors, but they're really the same thing. When they go and try to reach the same ends by using the same means, well, they do it big or they do it small, from a little tiny boat or from hallowed halls. Bully is as bully does, that's plain to see. Speaking of bullies, what would you say about a gang of vicious, low-down thugs who were trying to overthrow the government by attacking undefended civilian targets like schools, farms, hospitals, and outreach centers?
Why, I'd say they were terrorists.
I'm sorry, the correct answer is freedom fighters. At least that's what you called these thugs, aka the Contras, when you funded their campaign of terror and indiscriminate killing to overthrow the government of Nicaragua. There was trouble in the land of Nicaragua in the 80s, it's true. And Uncle Sam has always said this kind of thing just really won't do. So he paid for a bag full of dirty tricks and turned killers into heroes with a PR blitz. Well, freedom's sure a funny word for what the Contras did do. You know, there are pirates and emperors, but they're really the same thing. Even the ones who say they just want to let freedom ring, well, they do it big or they do it small, but only one goes down when they break the law, while the big one claims
this really don't apply to me.
The funny thing about pirates and emperors is that they often start out as pals who get into a tiff somehow and end up enemies.
You mean like Lex Luthor and Superman?
Yeah, except Lex Luthor was a nice guy before he lost all his hair, whereas Manuel Noriega, Saddam Hussein, and Osama bin Laden were all known thugs and mass murderers when they were on the CIA payroll. That's why they got the job. Either that, or Uncle Sam is just a really bad judge of character.
I don't understand why this keeps happening to me.
Well, not so long ago we thought Saddam here was a pretty swell guy, and we helped him get the goods to make the Ayatollah Khomeini cry. But Uncle Sam decided it was not Saddam's fate to be the leader of his Middle Eastern client state that was sitting on top of a big, huge oil supply. Big and little thugs got thuggery in common, even if one's got stars and stripes on him. Bully is as bully does, that's plain to see. 'Cause if it looks like a duck and acts like a duck and quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. You know, a rose is a rose no matter how much it stinks.
resent that comment. I'm not a duck. I'm an anti-duck. I'm a counter-duck. Well, I'm more of a mallard, really. Why, I'm fighting a war on ducks. Any ducks come around here, I'm gonna blast them.
That was very early on in the age of the internet. That was like one of the first like kind of leftist internet cartoons that went around. And it was inspired by Noam Chomsky's book, Pirates and Emperors, Old and New. So, yeah, I've been critical of Chomsky. I mean, I read Pirates and Emperors, Old and New. I actually took a class in college that it was called Political Voices from the Margins. And that was part of the assigned reading. And I read it and I thought, this is not, I mean, it's like basically he just says, America does bad things too. Like that's basically what the whole book is. It's just kind of like, acknowledging that atrocities exist on the part of people supported by the United States. It's like, why is that like the height of radicalism? Why is that considered so profound? That's what Noam Chomsky, again, this is what I was complaining about they let our enemies pick our leaders. Noam Chomsky was there. I mean, he was the first leftist I ever read because he was the only one I could find. He was the only one they had at the bookstore. And I read his books and they were very, very limited. There's a reason that he was the one we could all find. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, but anyway, like I said, I'm giving one last chance here for anyone to send any questions. And then I got to say goodnight because at 5 a.m. I am speaking to a Russian academic thing online. I'm speaking remotely to a Russian academic forum at 5 a.m. and then I'm going to go back to sleep. And then my wife and I are going to have a nice dinner and a nice lunch tomorrow. And then I'm going to do our CPI call. And then at 8, I'm going to go on a podcast I've never been on before. And then at 9, I'll be back on here, right? It's a small world after all. It's a small, small world. But there you go. All right. Anything else? Anything else people would like me to talk about? All right. Let me see if there's anything else I can put on. Any other videos I can put on? A chill stream. That's where you show videos, right? It's where you just kind of hang out. Well, I think we'll just have to settle for a classic Chinese communist song, right? Why not? We'll do that. All right. And then, yeah, I think we'll do, this is the North Korean performance of the classic Chinese communist song, Socialism is Good, brought to you from Pyongyang. Yeah, gotta love North Korean music. They've got some good music there in North Korea. But I guess I am gonna wrap this up. So be sure to come back tomorrow night. We're gonna have a good live stream tomorrow night. And dare to struggle, dare to win, as always. I really appreciate this community and all the great work that people here do. We are a dedicated group of people. And yeah, come to the CPI National Convention that's coming up. I'll talk more about that soon. So thanks, everybody. Good night.